One Piece Supreme Control, Chapter 301 to 320. Chapter 301 On the Deck. On the Reaper, which is far away from the island of Punk Hassad, it is also boiling at this moment. Hanrod looked at the crew of the Death God pirates who came in and out, carrying things, with a confused look on his face. At this time, this group of people was no longer as vigilant as before. Instead, their faces were relaxed, and even Drizzt and Bucky were humming a strange tone. There is a girl, he has some humanity, and he has some, arrogant. It's hard to believe that Landbass, such a rough and tall man, looks like a bear, with a beard and a big nose, humming such a song. This simply subverted Hanrod's worldview and made his face tremble. Hey, Landbass, what kind of weird song you sing? It's really ugly. Ace said sarcastically with black lines all over his head. Little brat, what do you know? Landbass said disdainfully. Don't worry about him, this dude has read a lot of novels recently. Luo said lightly, then turned to look at Hanrod. Hanrod, come here, help us move the wine, don't stand stupidly like no one else. Ah, yes, brother Luo. Hanrod was stunned and greeted him with a flattering face. Everyone went in and out, tossing quickly. Glades stood in the prescription, holding the kitchen knife in both hands, cut the chopping board with a bang sound, and turned the cut meals neatly and orderly into the pot. Roll in. Then, delicious juice. The liquid passed into the nose tip of everyone, making their faces show joyful expressions. It's delicious, I'm already so hungry. Half an hour later, huge plates were placed on the deck, and the aroma was concealed by silver aluminum pots. A jar of wine was placed around the meal, and there was a strong smell of wine. While everyone was busy, the door of a bedroom suddenly opened, bandaged, and a figure like a Zongzi stepped out. His steps faltered and he looked weak. But in the body, it exudes a unique domineering from the inside out. As he walked out of the room, the cadres on the ship all focused their attention on him, with excitement on their faces. Aha, I almost died, it's really dangerous. With a chuckle, Yang Qing sighed and looked at the food on the deck. It's really good, the food is ready and it looks delicious. I'm already hungry enough to eat a sea king. Just after he finished the 2 sentences, Dylan's and others ran around him, then hugged him with a big laugh, and threw them into the sky. Hey, what are you doing? Everyone laughed, threw Yang Qing to the sky, and then caught it. Their faces were full of smiles and excitement. It hurts, just put me down, it really hurts. Yang Qing grinned and kept breathing. He was covered in wounds all over his body, and it was really painful to touch his wounds. But at this time, although his mouth screamed pain, his face was full of smiles. Great, Captain, you're finally awake. Bucky yelled. Glades walked out of the kitchen at this time, wiped his hands, and saw everyone's actions. His face was stunned, and then he laughed. Ha ha, you are actually playing the captain like this. Let him go, our banquet has started. There are more than 200 dishes in total, no leftovers are allowed, all of them have to be eaten for me. Quick, put me down, quick. Yang Qing shouted loudly. At this time, everyone bypassed him and put him on the ground, all laughing loudly. Ha 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 ha. Looking at Yang Qing's nervous appearance, Dylan's took the lead in laughing, and the others were also smiling, and a joyful atmosphere spread across the boat. Immediately afterwards, everyone sat on the deck, surrounded by meals, food, and enjoyed it. Bucky, come and sing a song, welcome the captain all right, and more. Delanston paused and said with a smile. Celebrate our big victory and return, defeating the 4 Emperor Kaido. Hoa ho ho. On the Reaper, the excited roars of the crew members came out, and Yang Qing looked at the partners shouting loudly with a cheerful smile. What a wonderful weather. Taking a gulp of the wine, Yang Qing looked up at the white clouds in the sky and sighed in admiration. At this time, Luo's cold voice came over. The injury is not healed, and no alcohol is allowed. Yang Qing was stunned, then laughed and waved. Well, Luo, don't be so serious, today is our banquet, don't be so serious. Don't drink, Luo said coldly, without a trace of doubt. Shaking his head, Yangqing looked a little embarrassed and scratched his head. Drink less, just a little. Faced with doctors, patients have been a little cowardly since ancient times. However, this drink is one night. Everyone's interest was getting higher and higher, until at the end, there was a strong smell of alcohol on the deck, and the cadres lay on the deck and fell asleep. One by one unconscious, all were brought down by the drink. In the sea far away from the Shinigami, the three disasters converged. This is Boss Kaido, Drought Jack said with a complicated expression, pointing to the mass of flesh that was constantly deforming in front of him. Is that person so terrifying? He actually beat the strongest creature in the world like this. A tall voice said in surprise. Death, is the general trend ready? This was another voice. After about half a day, the meatball took on a human form, and after another day, Kaido's tall body appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Just its body. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. On the top, the scars are crisscrossed, looking extremely terrifying and shocking. That vicious aura was the same as before the battle between him and Yangqing. Kid Reaper, haha, Kaido grinned, it's amazing, amazing, amazing. I'm not even your opponent, I'm really surprised. However, unfortunately, it still can't kill me. Kaido stood up, raised his footsteps, and walked towards the bow position, looking at the distant sea-level road. I am really looking forward to it. The next time I see you. There must be another war. His voice was like a roar of a fierce beast, full of strong killing intent and gloom, causing the other three disasters who heard behind him to tremble, a little frightened. On the Reaper, the day after the celebration, the crew members woke up one by one, looking at the chaos on the deck. They couldn't help but bent their heads and sighed heavily. Clean up. Should I clean up by myself? Glades growled loudly. Chapter 302 Towards Another Four Emperors. Everyone was awakened by Glades' roar, then yawned, stood up one after another, and began to clean up the wine jars on the deck and leftover meals. The only patient named Yangqing, who was wearing a bandage, sneaked into the bedroom, then covered his head with a quilt, and continued to sleep soundly. Glades' eyes were sharp, but he didn't say anything after seeing it. That, Captain, Bucky found out and reported to Glades. The captain is seriously injured, how about you? Stop talking nonsense, hurry up and dispose of this garbage and mop the deck clean, you are the one who loves to be lazy every time with a red nose. Glades growled. Bucky's face twitched, and then he sighed heavily, and labored with a sigh. Glades frowned at the rear, raised his hand, and a wave of air came out, making Bucky throw a dog and eat shit. Come on, don't be lazy. The latter acted quickly, causing a group of people watching the fun to laugh. At noon, Yangqing went out of the bedroom in a full sleep, and saw a group of crew members lazily surrounding each other, and a trace of laziness appeared on his face. Almost all people in this boat have a temperament. When there is nothing to do, they are too lazy to move and don't want to move. When he stretched out his hand, the fishing rod in Yangqing's bedroom flew out and was grabbed by him. The weather is so good, let's catch some fish. Lazily throwing the hook in his hand into the sea, Yangqing sat cross-legged on the boat, closed his eyes, and began to doze off. I have to say that the injured person is sleepy, and their energy is not as good as others. Especially Yangqing, with the help of the unicorn fruit's ability, his resilience is different from ordinary people, but what it brings is an abnormal consumption of energy. Before it's time to eat, Yangqing's stomach has already begun to feel a little hungry. Dropping a fish is purely for a rest session and to recuperate energy. Half an hour later, Yangqing shook his hand, he closed his eyes, and his body almost conditioned reflex to take the fishing rod around, and a fish about 10 meters in size was thrown onto the deck by him. Yeah, we have lunch. Dylan said excitedly, grabbed the big fish and dragged it into the kitchen. Another hour later, Glades' cry came out. Yangqing opened his eyes and walked lazily towards the restaurant. A dozen people formed a circle and devoured the food. In about 10 minutes, everyone was almost full. Only Yang Qing was still throwing food into his mouth. It's hard to imagine that the boss has such a good appetite today. Drizzt exclaimed. People in the recovery period, the body needs energy. Luo explained lightly. Glades nodded and walked towards the kitchen again without saying a word. Then, plates of food were brought up. Yang Qing's stomach almost became a bottomless pit, and he kept stuffing food into his stomach. After a full hour, there were 2 stacks of plates stacked in front of him, and he let out a comfortable burp. How does it feel? Glades asked. Finally full, I feel full of energy all of a sudden. Yang Qing said with a smile, shaking her arms. That's good. Glades smiled. Everyone looked at Yang Qing's face and was amazed. We're full, we should go too. Yang Qing wiped his mouth, stood up, and said with a smile. He turned his head to Drizzt. Drizzt, where is our next goal? Wano Country, Drizzt said with a smile. Wano Country, that's Kaido's hometown. Yang Qing smiled, and then said seriously, if you change the route, can you go directly to where Shanks is? Long time no see, it's time to drink that glass of wine with him. Drizzt was stunned for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I can use my ability to shorten the cycle and choose the shortest distance. Then it's okay. Let's set sail. After 2 days of rest, it's time to do something serious. Yang Qing clapped her hands and said solemnly. But, boss, your injury. Bucky said worriedly. Ace also said, Captain, your injury, I'm afraid it's inappropriate to see another 4 emperors now. Don't worry, I can recover in 3 days at most. Yang Qing felt it and said with a smile, my fruit ability is amazing. And after this fight with Kaido, I have a new understanding. Everyone looked at each other and could only nod their heads in agreement. Then the whole ship started to move, the huge sails were put down, the pirate flag on the mast fluttered in the wind, and Zhang Yawu caught it. This time, the Reaper set sail again. And what kind of situation will it set off? Their goal is the 4 emperors Shanks. As one of the 4 emperors, how much stronger is Shanks than Kaido? Although the 2 are old friends, at the same time, they are also rivals. Will a war be fought again? 7 days later, the Reaper sailed above the sea, and their speed slowly slowed down. Hanrod looked at the sea in front of him, with obvious relief in his eyes, and a home-like look on his face. This is our sight, haha, you can rest assured that there is absolutely no guarantee of safety. Hanrod reassured loudly while patting the Shang department. Everyone's faces were also full of smiles. Yang Qing sat cross-legged at the bow of the boat, the bandages on his body had already been removed, and he stretched out his arms, but there was no scar on it, but it seemed extremely miraculous. Really good resilience, I am fully back on top and a step further than I was before. The whole body trembled, sword intent. This chapter is not over, click on the next page to continue reading. In the sky, a figure stepped out of his body. It was a little distorted at the beginning, but after 2 breaths, it stabilized, with sword eyebrows and sword eyes. It was another lifelike Yang Qing. Sword 23, this is the truly perfect Sword 23. Sword intent is out of the body, and oneself is already invincible. As long as the mental strength is sufficient, the power is endless, and no one can defeat it. Yang Qing's face was full of smiles. Everything can be a sword. With every gesture, Yang Qing's attacks were all vertical and horizontal with sword intent, and a random attack cut the sea in front of him into 2 halves, with terrifying power. Then, the sword light flashed and returned to his body. His body opened his eyes and returned to calm. Thanks to my control fruit and unicorn fruit, otherwise, it would be really difficult to complete this huge consumption of Sword 23. In addition, after this war, I found that the ability to control the fruit and the unicorn fruit can continue to grow. Chapter 303 Freedom. In the original book, when Luffy arrived at Dressrosa and fought against Doflamingo the Flamingo, the latter mentioned the awakening of the devil fruit. There are many and complex forces in this world, but roughly speaking, it can be summarized into 3 points. The first is the power of the devil fruit, the second is domineering, the third is swordsmanship, and other powers. Over time, with practice, the strength will continue to increase. The power of the devil fruit can be roughly divided into initial understanding, control, strengthening, and then awakening. As for whether there are higher levels behind, it is not shown in the original work. Only with the growth of Yang Qing's strength will we know. At this time, Yang Qing obviously felt that after a big battle and almost died, he had the power of a bottleneck for a long time, and finally he was liberated and could really step into another realm. The unicorn fruit hasn't been said yet, but the feeling of controlling the fruit is very obvious. Control the fruit. Yang Qing closed his eyes and began to spread his fruit ability. In the blink of an eye, he had already covered a radius of 50,000 miles around him, and then continued to go further, 60,000 miles, 70,000 miles, 80,000 miles, until 100,000 miles later, it stopped just now, and there is a weakening trend. 100,000 miles, my current fruit ability can cover a radius of 100,000 miles. A smile appeared on Yang Qing's face. Besides, I can control everything within the range. 100,000 miles away, within the limit of Yang Qing's fruit's ability to maximize its ability, a wooden boat was slowly driving along with the sea breeze. There are only two people on this boat. One is a grandfather who is about 60 years old, and the other is a little girl who is only 10 years old. Hee hee, Grandpa, we caught a lot of fish today. Loli can eat a lot more tonight. The little girl Loli smiled happily, running back and forth on the wooden boat. Hee hee, little Loli, don't run around. The wooden boat has been unstable recently. This time we are a little too far from the island, so we have to go back quickly. The old man looked at the little girl kindly and said, Grandpa, let's go back quickly. I want to eat braised fish, steamed fish, and sashimi. Loli said happily. Okay, we'll go back. The old man smiled and nodded. All the movements, expressions, and even the voices of the old and young were heard by Yang Qing. It was also after stepping into this devil fruit that Yang Qing finally understood the power of the control fruit and why it was called the control fruit. That sentence, a fruit like a god, made Yang Qing finally understand the specific meaning at this moment. Really, a godlike power that controls everything, controls everything. Yang Qing's hand trembled, and a fish suddenly flew up beside the wooden boat, one old and one young. Then they jumped up in surprise and celebrated each other. 100,000 miles away, Yang Qing has been able to control everything. It is conceivable that if one day, his power can cover the entire pirate world, then everything in this world will truly enter his control. This is an invincible power, a power that only the gods can control. Nice power. After awakening, it will be even more terrifying. Really, it controls all things. Yang Qing closed his eyes and carefully understood the new power, which made him smile uncontrollably. It was so perfect that he even doubted that there is no more perfect power in the world than such a power. There was a clear difference from the things he controlled before. Before, he was able to control everything that he came into contact with, the existing things, but now, after the awakening of the devil fruit, he can even control the things that do not exist. To briefly explain, he has been able to create elements out of thin air, and within the range of control, he has almost everything that the fruit of the natural system can achieve. What kind of power is this? Like a god. Just because of the initial entry into this realm, Yang Qing is not very skilled in controlling the ability of the devil fruit, and his power is also very small. However, one day, he will develop the ability to control the fruit. What kind of scene will that be? 100,000 miles away, one old man and one young man drove towards a small island that could be seen in the distance with happy smiles on their faces. At this moment, Yang Qing thought on the death god, and spit out a word. Wind. Call. A gust of wind blew 100,000 miles away, and the sea surface fluctuated. The wind came so suddenly that Loli, who was jumping back and forth on the wooden boat, was immediately tripped. When the old man saw it, he hurried over. Lori, how are you? Are you okay? The old man asked worriedly. Grandpa, I'm fine. Little Loli raised her right hand, and the old man looked at it, but it was scratched a little, and blood was flowing out, but it was not serious, and he was relieved. Little Loli is fine, just a little scratch. Little Loli doesn't cry, you are the strongest. Loli nodded, Loli is the strongest. But in his eyes, there were clearly glittering tears, and the pain made this little girl who was only about 10 years old almost cry, but she was forcibly held back. Okay, Grandpa helps you bandage it. Don't cry, the children in the sea are the strongest, because. Grandpa said softly. We are the freest. There were tears in Loli's eyes, but she laughed and said that his grandfather also had a smile on his face. Yes, we are the freest. The old man said with emotion. 100,000 miles away, Yang Qing opened his eyes, his expression a little complicated. Pirates, are you the freest? After 3 breaths, the smile on his face appeared again, and his expression changed to affirmation. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Yes, we are the freest. And One Piece is the freest man in the sea. Because of freedom, so strong. Looking into the distance, Yang Qing's mouth crooked. These two seemed to be in trouble. Although the little Loli's arm was only scratched, its bloody aura attracted carnivorous fish in the sea. The ferocious faces were cheering and jumping, the ferocious teeth shone coldly in the sun, and a cruel laughter was released between the mouths opening and closing, announcing their arrival. A total of more than a dozen lights and shadows came here, chasing closely behind the wooden boat. The old man didn't notice, so when these big guys slammed into the wooden boat, his expression changed drastically. Chapter 304 Arrival. Lori, lie down. In an instant, the old man threw Loli on the deck of the wooden boat. Just as he fell down, 3 ferocious fish half a person high crossed their heads, made a sound of mocking cruelty, and then plunged into the water with a pop. Northbed piranha. The moment the old man saw these fish out of the corner of his eye, his face changed greatly, and fine beads of sweat immediately oozed out of his forehead. He turned his head and said loudly to Loli behind him, Lori, lie down, don't get up, remember, don't come out. Grandpa. Loli looked terrified. She was still a little stunned. She watched her grandfather quickly walk to the other side, picked up the harpoon, and stared at the surroundings with a dignified expression. The Northbed piranha, a very bloodthirsty fish species, is much more vicious than the sharks in the 4 seas. They are not big, only half the height of an adult fish, but their aggression is even more frightening than that of adult humans. In front of him, the old man looked at the scratches in the water. There were more than 20 scratches in the water, and his whole body was tense. Damn it, I would never have come this far if I knew it earlier. I don't care, but Lolita, she's still young. Sorry, very sorry, for entering the deep sea this time. The old man has regretted it to the extreme. At the next moment, when more than 20 scratches all approached the wooden boat, the old man's face changed suddenly, and he shouted. Ah, come on. Even if I die, I will never let you hurt Loli. At this moment, he remembered how brave he was when he was young and how powerful he was when he was young. At this moment, a strong force burst out from the old man's aged body. His spine, which had been bent for decades, made a crackling sound at this moment, and then became straight at the next moment. At this moment, in Loli's eyes, a majestic power suddenly burst out of her grandfather. Grandpa, it's amazing. Bang bang bang. Above the sea, a series of explosions came out. More than 20 piranhas rushed out of the water and rushed towards the small wooden boat. They had a smirk in their mouths, like people, with expressions. The old man looked up and saw himself in front of him, and he could hardly see any other food. A piece of black, all filled with piranhas. Too many, all fell down, and the boat will surely overturn. He held the harpoon in his hand and swung it out forcefully. But the next moment, the piranha's body slammed into his harpoon, and the old man was shocked and stunned that his harpoon hit the opponent's body, and it broke with a click. It's over. The old man sighed in despair. He even saw a hint of ridicule in the expression of the piranha that was so far away from him, which made him even more desperate. Lori. In this extremely urgent situation, the old man glanced at his granddaughter out of the corner of the eye. Loli, who was only about 10 years old, was lying there, with fear in her eyes, as well as her belief in herself, as if in her little heart, oneself is omnipotent. I'm sorry, Loli, my grandpa is incompetent. When I was a pirate when I was young, I was incompetent. When I get old, I can't even beat a few fish. It's really incompetent. Closing his eyes, the old man dared not look at his granddaughter's eyes. I'm sorry, Loli, it was Grandpa who hurt you. But at the next moment, more than 20 fish were about to land on the wooden boat. When the boat was overturned, a majestic voice suddenly sounded in the ears of the old and the young. Wind. Call. The gust of wind blew up in an instant, and suddenly, a terrible wind blew across the wooden boat's bow. The eyes of more than 20 piranhas became panic, because they felt that their bodies could not maintain their balance, and were brought down by the gust of wind to the other side. Just 3 breaths, they got out of the wooden boat. The old man opened his eyes, stood in the frantic wind, fluttering, and when he saw the piranha in a deviated position, his pupils widened, he couldn't believe it. What's going on? Fire! The majestic voice sounded again, and then the old man and Loli were shocked to see that in the air, the bodies of the more than 20 fish actually burst into flames. The piranha cried out in pain and struggled in the sky. Immediately afterwards, a word came out again. Ice. The sound of clicking continued, and more than 20 fish quickly froze and were frozen into statues. Wind. The wind picked up again, and more than 20 fish were blown back to the wooden boat, and then fell. The wooden boat swayed violently, but it still didn't turn over. Seeing everything going on so quickly, the old man was completely stunned. Loli's beautiful big eyes were full of doubts. She got up carefully, avoided the more than 20 frozen fish on the boat, and walked towards the old man. Grandpa, what's going on? Was it made by Grandpa? The old man was stunned for a moment, then smiled bitterly. How could it be me? Grandpa doesn't have that much power. The next moment, remembering the voice in his ears just now, the old man's eyes were complicated. Maybe it's God. God. Loli's eyes were full of light. Is there really a God? Is there a God? This question may need to be answered, but the mysterious phenomenon this time is definitely not caused by God. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. On the Reaper, young Ching opened his eyes and let out a long breath. Pooh, scared me to death, almost because of experimenting with new tricks. This old and young are buried in the sea, it's really dangerous. At first, the gust of wind blew Loli down, which led to the arrival of the piranhas behind. Investigating its root cause, it is really young Ching's fault. The wooden boat set sail again, heading towards the laughing road in the distance, but this time there were more than 20 piranhas. These fish must be delicious. Loli's saliva was almost dripping. Ha ha, it's all baked, the old man said with a smile. A minute later, young Ching, who was finally relieved, let out a long sigh and was about to withdraw his observation of the two, but in the next moment, his pupils shrank suddenly. A red long-headed boat, stepping on the sea level, marked the sea with traces, and drove in the direction where he was. Above its mast, the ferocious skeleton pirate flag fluttered in the wind. At the bow of the boat, there was a red-haired pirate with a western long sword on his waist, with a lazy smile on his face. With the arrival of this ship, the entire sea area seemed to be enveloped by a majestic atmosphere. Chapter 305 Kilometer Distance. This pirate group is one of the 4 emperors, the red-haired pirate group headed by the red-haired Shanks. In front of it, the 4 emperors had red hair, and behind it, the officers and crew of the 4 emperor pirates, all smiling, looked straight ahead, and let the sea breeze blow their hair. Everyone exudes a strong momentum, shocking everyone. I am really looking forward to meeting them again. Shanks chuckled lightly, facing the sea breeze, and his voice clearly entered Yang Qing's ears. After changing his vision, Yang Qing took a look at all the decorations on the ship. On the center deck, a jar of wine made a smile on his face. He remembered the promise once. The man on the sea always respects the promise. Say it and do it, even at the cost of your life. Yeah, I have a hunch, I'll be able to see them soon. The deputy captain said with a light smile. Shanks nodded, and then said, let the brothers speed up. They just exchanged fire with the Kaido pirates, maybe they are encountering difficulties. The crew behind them immediately acted, and after the red pirate ship shook, it accelerated its advance again. Guys! Yang Qing shouted on the Reaper, with a smile on his face. Captain, what's the matter? Drizzt, playing cards, responded. Hurry up and speed up, the old friends are ahead. Yang Qing said with a smile. What, old friend? Ace asked suspiciously. Could it be Shanks? Bucky said loudly. In this sea area, their old friend is only Shanks. Suddenly, everyone jumped up. Shanks, one of the four emperors, is not an ordinary character, not only their old friend, but also a real big pirate, standing at the top of the world. Peek. That's right, they're right in front of us. Go straight ahead, you'll see them soon. Yang Qing said with a big laugh. Behind him, the crew immediately boiled. Excited to get up one by one, Drizzt stood in front of the rudder. Ha ha ha, then, let's speed up. Drizzt laughed, then pressed the red button beside him. Anilu, it's up to you. Understood. Anilu nodded indifferently, and then stood on the metal chair on the platform of the Death God, with blue lightning flashing on his body. Crackling. There was a sound of electric arcs, and the whole ship shook, and then flashed blue arcs. Guys, let you see the official power of the Reaper today, ha ha ha. Drizzt shouted. The entire ship was filled with thunder and lightning. Under the deck, in the power room, some huge metal gears were originally stationary, but at this moment, they started to rotate under the drive of electric energy. With the passage of time, the rotation became faster and faster, and finally, with a bang, the propellers bounced out from the bottom of the boat, and then moved quickly. The people on the Reaper suddenly swayed, and then they saw the scenery on both sides quickly retreating to both sides. The strong wind blew up, blowing everyone's black hair, and their clothes and robes moved. Damn it, Drizzt, I never knew how the Reaper could go so fast. Bucky yelled, running to the bow. That's cool, what a speed. Faster than the sea train. Is this the electric power device on the Reaper? Moria said with a smile. At this time, Dillons was standing in front of Yang Qing with a serious face. What, Dillons? Yang Qing smiled lightly. You know what? Dillons said suddenly. What? Yang Qing wondered. Shanks is one of the four emperors after all. In terms of interests, he is the same as the other three emperors. Dillon's eyes were full of solemnity and seriousness. Yes, I know, Yang Qing nodded. So, what's your attitude? Do you really want to fight them too? Dillons asked. Who knows? Yang Qing said in a lazy tone and stretched. This result will be known in a while. Dillons's eyes narrowed, and he was about to speak again. Yang Qing waved his hand and said with a smile, Don't worry, everything is up to me, Shanks, I trust him. At the very least, we won't be enemies. Dillons's eyes flashed and he pondered for a moment before turning his head and leaving. Meanwhile, the red-haired pirates are on board. Captain, so are we still going to fight them? Beckman touched his chin. Yeah, I'm the fourth emperor. Pirates have honor in addition to freedom. Shanks said with a smile. Will it be the end? Yasuo was a little worried. Don't worry, I believe in Lucifer. At least, we won't be enemies. Shanks said confidently. The two pirate ships looked at each other across a long distance, and the two captains said the same sentence at almost the same time. Perhaps this is some kind of tacit understanding. 10 days later, a black spot on the sea level was clearly visible. So, that's Shanks, right? Bucky shouted, and Hanrod beside him also shouted, and his pirate group finally came, which made Hanrod a little excited. Yes, it's them. Yang Qing nodded with a smile on his face. Seeing that they are about to meet, everyone is a little excited. 3 hours later, the two ships were only 1 kilometer away. The cadres on both sides of the ship were standing at the bow. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. They all looked at each other with smiles on their faces. In front of the reaper, a wooden boat swayed and sailed very slowly. It was the old man and the young man that Yang Qing saw. It was a coincidence that today, Yang Qing actually saw them again. The huge reaper made a low sound like a beast roar, and the small wooden boat was as small as a gravel at the foot of the reaper. Seeing the huge grim reaper approaching him, one old and one young looked terrified. Okay, what a big ship. Loli was shocked and frightened, and the old man was too shocked to speak. Today they also went out to sea to fish, but they were not far from the port, but they never thought they would see such a magnificent ship when they came back. Woohoo woohoo. The loud whistle sounded, causing the two of them to cover their ears, and the grim reaper slowly stopped. Afterwards, they saw a young figure jump down from the boat. With a lazy smile on his face and a blue long sword on his back, it landed on their wooden boat very lightly. What a coincidence, seeing you again. Chapter 306 Confrontation. The small wooden boat swayed with the waves, and the large sunlight was completely blocked by the huge ship in front of him. One old and one young, looking at the huge ship that fell in front of them, and the smiling young man, were a little confused. Big brother, have you seen us before? Loli said timidly. The old man looked a little scared. The young man in front of him was no ordinary person at first glance. He jumped off the huge ship, like a float. Not affected by gravity. Yang Qing smiled and looked at the two people in front of him. Hearing little Loli asking him, she couldn't help but smile. With his right hand, he touched his head. Yes, I saw you not long ago. Seeing the smile on Yang Qing's face, Loli shook her head. But, Loli has never met her brother. Loli has a good memory and has no impression of her brother at all. Haha, I've seen you, but you haven't seen your brother. Yang Qing said with a smile. Loli didn't understand, and the old man beside her looked a little wary. This little brother suddenly came to the boat of the old man and his granddaughter. What is your purpose? The old man was a little serious and a little nervous. Yang Qing was stunned for a moment, then shook his head with a smile, and turned his head to the back of the two. This sea area is no longer a place for the old man and the little guy to stay. It's too dangerous on this wooden boat. Huh, the old man was startled, and then his pupils tightened suddenly. The next moment, he saw that the young man in front of him actually floated up and went towards the sky. To his horror, he and his granddaughter flew into the air and followed closely behind the young man. The two of you don't need to panic, it's just a different place for you. Yang Qing's laughter entered the ears of the two of them, making them inexplicable. After 10 seconds, they fell from the deck. The old man was stunned when he saw the crew of the Reaper and the ferocious pirate flag fluttering in the wind, and panic flashed in his eyes. Pirate. It turned out to be a pirate. The old man said worriedly. The little Loli beside him, who didn't know pirate flag, didn't realize that he was already in the wolf's den unknowingly. It's dangerous to encounter two innocent outsiders in this sea area. Bucky exaggeratedly shouted, looking at the watery little Loli. Little girl, come, uncle has candy here. I don't eat sweets, Loli said cutely, making Bucky the red nose stagnant, and the others burst into laughter. Don't make trouble, now is not the time to make trouble. Yang Qing turned her head, looked at the sea in front, and glanced at the little Loli and the old man. Dylan's, protect our guests. No problem. Dylan's approached the little Loli and said with a smile, little girl, what's your name? My name is Loli, Lolita said in a cute voice. Oh, Loli, stand beside my brother for a while, don't run around. Dylan said with a smile, and the old man, you too. Following Yang Qing's line of sight, the old man saw that the red pirate ship on the opposite side was getting closer and closer, and finally understood. A trace of fear flashed in his eyes. Okay. Who are they? The red-haired pirates, the legendary 4 emperors. So, for a while, the old man must stick to me. otherwise, you will not be able to withstand their impact. Dylan said solemnly. By this time, the people on the Reaper could clearly see the silhouettes of the other party's bow. His face was cold, and his body was full of strong domineering. The red-haired pirates, this is not the unique temperament of the Kaido pirates. They attacked without authorization and looked for enemies. They formed a group together, and the strength of the group was exerted to the limit by them. If there is a war, it will be extremely chaotic. Of course, because of the relationship between the two pirate groups, this is unlikely to happen. But in everything, there are always surprises, right? Suddenly, an inexplicable domineering aura surged up, and the calm sea suddenly swayed, and the incomparably domineering and majestic aura was centered on the bow of the former red-haired pirate group, and bombarded it outright. The sea began to tremble, and waves of ripple-like shapes came forth. "Come on, Captain," Drizzt shouted solemnly. "I see." Yang Qing smiled and took a step forward, standing in front of everyone. "Let me come," Ace said loudly, standing behind Yang Qing. Yang Qing was stunned for a moment, then smiled. "Then try your temperament, don't be ashamed." Hanrod clenched his fists and stood aside, staring closely at the crew of the two pirate ships, his eyes constantly rolling. "I am really excited. This is the legendary battle between two pirates, both of them are famous pirates. The Four Emperors Red Hair versus the Shinigami Pirates." The rolling strong domineering overlord swept in, making the entire sea tremble. Unlike Kaido, Shanks didn't have that arrogant aura. In comparison, he seemed more calm and domineering. He has almost all the qualities of a perfect pirate, which may be the result of being nurtured in his early years and following One Piece. Even Yang Qing had to admit that compared with Shanks, the old-fashioned pirate, he was incomparable in some places. For example, if you are humiliated, you will definitely fight back immediately. As for Shanks, he would choose to smile indifferently, and his mind was truly as broad as the sea. Only when he regarded the other party as an enemy, or threatened something he cared about, would he be furious. At this moment, the strong domineering arrogance of the Four Emperor Shanks made the whole sea tremble. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Chestnut. It rolled in, then swept through the air, swept over the wooden boat. Click. Were various cracks on the wooden boat, and then there was a bang, which turned into pieces and turned into wood. "Grandpa, our ship," standing on the bow, lowly exclaimed. The old man's eyes were full of horror. The breath had not yet arrived, but he had already felt the serious atmosphere in the air. "Ace." At this moment, Yang Qing snorted with a serious expression. "Understood, Captain." Ace laughed, his face suddenly serious, and then the next moment, his eyes narrowed and he stared suddenly. Buzz. An equally domineering aura spread out, centered on the bow of the death god, gushing out directly, and slammed into the aura coming from the opposite side. Chapter 307 The Four Emperors Red Hair. In just a moment, the two domineering breaths collided. At this moment, the white clouds in the sky were torn into two halves, and then the Grim Reaper trembled violently, shaking, and the sea below it trembled, and the sea began to divert. Two strong overlords collided with each other, forming a confrontation scene. "Captain, is Ace okay?" "That's Shanks." Drizzt worried. In less than 3 seconds, fine beads of sweat appeared on Ace's forehead, and his whole body trembled. Trembling. The domineering accomplishments of the Four Emperors Shanks, especially the overlord color, have reached a very deep level. Red-haired pirates on board. I am surprised that there is such a guy on the ship of the Reaper. A smile appeared on Shanks' face. Across the distance, he could clearly see the Reaper on the ship. The freckled boy, the pained look on his face, however, it's still a little tender. Although he said this on the surface, Shanks still found out that there was a familiar aura in this tyrannical arrogance. It was just this familiar aura that made him unable to remember where he had seen or felt for a while. The overlord domineering arrogance increased again and was suppressed. Ace's expression on the Reaper instantly changed drastically, and his face suddenly paled. Beside him, Yang Qing took a step forward, blocking all the strong breath in front of him. Shanks, old friends meet, this gift is a bit big. Dan's laughter was very light, but it spread wonderfully throughout the sea. Oh, Lucifer. Shanks' eyes flashed, and a smile appeared in his eyes. Old friends are old friends, but at this moment, they are also enemies. Come on then. Yang Qing's eyes narrowed suddenly, and a surging domineering arrogance rolled out from his body, directly suppressing Shanks' arrogance, and then counterattacked, following the opponent's side just now. The root that came over swept away again abruptly. Click. In the sea, the wooden boat that had just shattered, at this moment once again became indistinguishable and shattered again. Buzzing. The space has become distorted at this moment. Compared with Ace's relatively immature overlord, Yang Qing's is much more mature. There was even a hint of the majesty and energy of the Scylla kingdom in the Nine Heavens mountain in his breath, which made others feel uncomfortable and wanted to bow down to the ground. Moreover, the intense compression, and the vastness of the overlord of the sea, are also terrifying. Ace stood behind Yang Qing, trembling all over. Shaking, Luo walked behind him and patted his shoulder. Are you all right? It's okay, don't worry. Ace whispered, looking at the red-haired man. Is this Shanks? This is Shanks from Luffy's mouth. What a terrible man. Just through the confrontation of breath, Ace can distinguish the terrifying and powerful of the other party, which is not something that he can fight against at this time. As the other party said, he was still too tender. Although he entered the new world and experienced so many battles, he was still far behind the other. In comparison, Captain, it's really terrible. Looking at Yang Qing standing in front of him, easily blocking the opponent's breath, Ace was full of amazement. This man is simply unfathomable, powerful and admirable. Different from the familiarity with Yang Qing's power on the Reaper, on the Red Hair Pirates, everyone who felt Yang Qing's overlord breath immediately changed their faces. Come on, just kidding, this kid. Beckman's eyes were full of shock. This is that kid. Such a terrifying growth rate. Yasuo said in horror. There were more ordinary crew members behind him, who were accidentally stimulated by this breath, and fell to the ground directly, even standing unsteadily. Shanks, eyes dignified, full of smiles, as expected of the guy who defeated Kaido, even I have to admire such a spirit. At the same time, his heart was also wandering. Compared with the Luffy he chose, this guy in front of him obviously has the potential to grow into One Piece. He is young, strong, ambitious, and full of justice in his heart, and most importantly. Shanks' eyes swept over the people behind him one by one, looking at the eyes of the cadres of death. More importantly, he has a group of partners who are always firm and support him. Pirates can never truly conquer the world alone. The pirates are a collective, and only when this collective is truly integrated into one, can a force that shocks the entire world erupt. The reason why he, Shanks, became the fourth emperor was not the result of his own efforts. Is Hawkeye powerful? Of course he is powerful, but he can always be a loner, a swordsman, not a big pirate. Shanks' eyes were serious, and the domineering arrogance in his body pressed towards the opponent again, but the maximum he could do was only equal to the opponent. That kid's arrogance is already on par with the captain. The crew of the Red Hair Pirates realized this and said in shock. At this moment, the two pirate ships began to buzz and move towards each other. They began to approach each other continuously, not far from each other, so after only 3 minutes, two large and small boats were standing there quietly. Woo 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 woo. A dull sound began to sound, and the Death God pirates put down the cord plate for docking and placed it firmly on the bow of the red-haired ship. Old friend, don't you want to talk about it? This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Yang Qing's voice came from a height and enveloped the entire sea. Shanks laughed and stretched out his hands beside him. Out, grabbed a jar of wine, and then walked step by step towards the Reaper. The thick pressure still did not dissipate, and Yang Qing had already withdrawn the domineering look of the overlord. The confrontation was over when the two were just leveled. At this moment, they are the guests, but they are the masters, and they cannot be powerless and release any attack. Dirons. Yang Qing drank in a low voice. Dylan's nodded, turned his head and stepped back. The other crew members also spread out, making room for the bow position. Da! The sound of Shank's footsteps came out clearly, and the strong domineering color spread over the entire ship. The fish in the surrounding seawater stopped at this moment, rolled their eyes, and fell into confusion. It's terrifying. It's just the aura on the body. It's just the aura. Is this the four emperors' red hair? It's scary. The old man looked at Shanks in horror, standing behind Dylan's, his whole body was shaking. Chapter 308 Sitting oppositely. Da-da. Shanks spread his left and right hands, and two huge wine jars swayed as he advanced. The domineering arrogance on his body continued to increase at this moment, so that the entire Reaper was silent, and the fluctuating sea water below seemed to be still. In an instant, the scene here became tense, and the expressions of Dylan's and his group of death cadres were also cold and serious. This is the arrival of an emperor. It is different from the last time we met with old friends. At this moment, this red-haired guy is the real four emperors, and he is the king who is at the top and the peak position among the pirates. He has his own majesty, his own backbone, and his own kingly aura. This is a visit to an old friend, but it is also a test for the guy who provoked his throne. Buzz. On the Reaper, it began to tremble violently, and the overlord domineering mental will spread, and at this moment, the entire sea area fell into a tense atmosphere. Ah! Lolita cried out in pain. Dylan's complexion changed, his figure took a step back, and he blocked the rest of the old man behind him. An invisible force poured out of his body and enveloped the two of them. The next moment, the painful expressions of the two disappeared and they relaxed. The suffocating breath, although most of it was blocked by other people, the aftermath alone still made them uncomfortable. Maria and Robin felt a little uncomfortable at the moment. After all, they were not serious combatants, but they still insisted on gritting their teeth and resisting the terrifying pressure. As for Hanrod, under the coercion of his own captain, his legs became weak, and he was unable to stand up. On the Grim Reaper, every crew member of the pirates became solemn. In front of the deck, Yang Qing stood with one hand on his sword, sitting there cross-legged with a serious and condensed expression, staring closely at Shanks who was getting closer. The arrival of the Emperor made the atmosphere here extremely heavy. As Shanks advanced step by step, the red hair swayed, and he finally came to the deck of the Reaper. Looking at Yang Qing who was sitting cross-legged waiting for him, Shanks had a bold smile on his face. Ha 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 ha, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Bang bang. Two huge wine jars were thrown in front of Yang Qing. Standing there steadily, Yang Qing's eyes narrowed, looking at Shanks opposite, and then smiled. Shanks, sit down. Buzz. The domineering arrogance of the overlord dissipated suddenly, and everyone on the Reaper breathed a sigh of relief. This strong domineering arrogance is always pressing on them, making them feel as if a mountain is pressing down on them, and their whole body is very uncomfortable. Shanks strode to the front of the wine jar, 3 meters away from Yang Qing, and then sat down with his knees crossed. He also took out the western sword from his waist with one hand and stood on the ground. Drink first, then talk about other things. Yang Qing chuckled. Long time no see, I've been looking forward to this scene for a long time. Me too. Shanks showed a complicated expression. After nearly 10 years, I am amazed by your growth. Life is forced by dreams and pursuits. Yang Qing said with a smile. Shanks nodded, then laughed. Then let's have a drink. I've kept this jar of wine for too long. Taste. Surprisingly fragrant. Hometown wine. Yang Qing raised her brows. Hometown wine, Shanks affirmed. Then, the two looked at each other and let out a series of loud laughter. On the deck of the Reaper, the cadres were silent, looking at the two kings sitting cross-legged on the deck. These two are the top powerhouses in the world and the two with the highest status. They used to be friends, and now they are also friends, but at the same time they have become rivals. After drinking, the two would shake hands and talk, or draw swords to fight. Bang bang. Two people in a row, the two patted the wine jar with one hand, the lid on it flew into the sky, and then drew a parabola and fell into the sea. The rich aroma of wine spread throughout the pirate ship in the blink of an eye, and a hint of yearning appeared on his face. "It's really good wine," Yang Qing exclaimed, "it's too much trouble." "You're too kind, you've put more effort into me than a wine jar." Shanks laughed, swept his arm from the corner of his eye. "Without that treatment, it would not be as simple as breaking an arm, and the most important element would be the reduction in combat power." But at this moment, he had to admit that he was still the world-famous red-haired Shanks of the Four Emperors. "Come on, drink," Yang Qing shouted, dragging on the edge of the wine jar with one hand. Shanks also shouted and stretched out the same way, out of the right hand. The next second, the two of them worked hard at the same time. The gigantic wine jars were jerked up, their mouths tilted, aimed at their respective mouths bars. The strong drink fell from the air and fell into their mouths. Drops of wine spilled on the deck, slapped the placket, and a stronger aroma of wine came out. Boom blah blah. One mouthful, the two of them are drinking water like a cow, and they are constantly drinking. Men have this in common. When they meet each other, they have not seen each other for a long time. When they get together again, they will definitely drink, and they will definitely drink a lot. Ah! After a long time, the two put the big jar of wine on the deck, and there was a dong sound. Cool, really good wine. Yang Qing was very happy drinking, with a smile on his face. His ice blue Longchen sword was inserted straight on the deck. Like him, Shanks' western sword was also inserted on the deck. The two swords were exactly on the same level. I put this wine. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. After a long time, today, I finally drank him. Shanks laughed. Thank you, Yang Qing said. The next moment, the smiles on both of their faces dimmed. But, after drinking, there are some things that I have to do. Shanks' face became serious. He slowly stretched out his right hand, and then lightly grabbed the hilt of his western sword. Since you are pirates, come to my waters, that is my opponent. Yang Qing's pupils condensed, staring at the person opposite carefully. The two faced each other cross-legged, the atmosphere became tense again, and all the crew members around them looked nervous. On the red-haired pirate ship, Beckman, Yasop and others also clenched their fists and looked up at the two people sitting cross-legged on the deck. Ha, come on. Yang Qing laughed and his eyes became serious. I have already made all the preparations. The right hand stretched out, and suddenly clenched the icy blue hilt. The next moment, the long sword was unsheathed and cut through the air. Chapter 309 _ Sing. The crisp sound of the sword sound came out, and almost an instant later, the two long swords touched together fiercely. Boom. The movements of the two of them were almost at their peak, and almost all the people watching were not able to see when they drew their swords. But at this moment, the two long swords have already touched. Ripples began to appear in the space, and after a powerful sword was pressed for 3 breaths, it just bounced into the sky from the place where the two touched. Bang bang bang. A series of explosions sounded from around the Reaper, and the surrounding sea water was carried by the powerful aftermath, making a rumbling sound. The two swords touched, the two of them bent down slightly, and their eyes were extremely dignified. As this Shanks. Yang Qing held the sword in one hand, the ice blue blade stalemate with the slender western sword, and there was always huge pressure rolling in from there. The terrifying power on Shanks shocked him. And it was Shanks who was as horrified as he was. Old friend, your strength really surprised me. This is what really allows Shanks to use his full strength. Just now, the two of them drew their swords at the same time, stood up at the same time, and then swung their swords at the same time. Even the power they exerted was of equal size and balance. The sword pressure touched each other, and the sword pressure spread out, causing the faces of the people on the boat to change greatly. The confrontation between these characters is really not something they can stop, it is really terrible. The rest of the crew of the red-haired pirates also jumped from all over the place. They were either standing on the deck or sitting on the boat, and they all stared at the two people in the center of the deck with solemn eyes. Those juniors on the opposite side are really good looking. King to king, generals, and the cadres of the red-haired pirates are also scanning Dylan's and others at this moment, looking for their goals. They are all thinking in their hearts, who should they be their opponents after the war? Nilu's indifference, Dylan's solemnity, and Bucky's arrogance, and Drizzt and the others all seemed to be difficult to deal with, immediately made Beckman and others serious. It's all guys who have been killed all the way, not the kind of strength that comes from luck. Yasuope whispered. Look at these two first. Beckman turned his eyes to the two in the center of the deck. The two swords were still in a stalemate. On the Death God, the two continued to increase their output power, causing the Death God to sink toward the sea as a whole. Even the faces of the people near the edge of the boat began to change. They watched helplessly, the sea water getting closer and closer to them. It seems that the entire Reaper will be submerged in the next moment. For Emperor Shanks, it really lives up to its reputation. Yang Qing said with a light smile, then stepped back and retracted his sword. The huge pressure suddenly dissipated, and the Reaper suddenly rebounded, heading towards the sky. The people on the boat swayed and could not stand still. When the ship stabilized again, the two swayed again, and the slender sword energy condensed. Afterwards, the two fought a careful battle. Whoa, 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 whoa. A series of air-piercing sounds came out, and the two long swords attacked each other. The fast one could only see the afterimage. The two stood on the spot and hardly moved, showing a strong ability to control. Immediately afterwards, the continuous sound of gold and iron came out, which was as heavy as a dull thunder. And as they attacked each other, 1,000 meters of distance behind the two of them, the sea surface was continuously cut off by ditches and ravines. Continues to appear, then slashes further. In front of the two of them, the sea seemed to be able to split easily, which was incredibly powerful. The sound of bang bang continued, the two swordsmen were majestic, and the battle became more and more hearty. They condensed their sword will and bound them in a very small range to avoid hurting the surrounding ships and crew. But it was the distant sea area that suffered, and the huge sponges were destroyed within a range of thousands of miles. Countless flying fish were dismembered, blood filled the sea, and a strong smell of blood came out. A huge sea king was awakened by this sword energy, and jumped out of the sea in horror, but in the next moment, the sword energy was divided into pieces in the vertical and horizontal directions. Most of the sea surface was dyed bright red. It's terrifying, these two people, without moving, have already destroyed a sea area. Dylan's exclaimed. This moment is the battlefield of their king, and they are not allowed to fight when the boss is not speaking. Moreover, Dylan's does not think that these two pirate groups really need a battle. He watched Kaido's battle from the beginning to the end. At that time, Yang Qing's seriousness and fierceness were far more than this time. In short, these two are really just sparring. With a smile on his face, Yang Qing looked relaxed. He held the sword in his right hand, poked and pointed at Zhang Shan, and easily knocked or blocked the western sword that Shanks attacked. Within 30 seconds, the two stabbed almost thousands of times, either horizontally, vertically, or obliquely. But it is extremely accurate to take over any attack from the opponent, which is unparalleled. 30 seconds later, the two of them stood up at the same time, with smiles already on their faces. I have to say, you got my approval, Lucifer. Your growth in a short period of time shocked me. Shanks laughed and took back the western sword. For Emperor Shanks, well-deserved reputation, really amazing. Yang Qing said seriously. Shanks' strength is completely different from Kaido's. Compared to Yang Qing, Shanks is more attractive to him. Kaido is like a beast. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. His brute force is endless, and he can use extremely powerful force to completely crush his enemies and live in undeath, but Shanks is another way. Shanks was more composed. Just like an old hunter, Shanks has more brains. He is calm, bold and big-minded. Maybe his power is not as strong as Kaido, but he can do it and maximize his power. This is something Kaido cannot do. If there is a real decisive battle, for Shanks, the pressure on Yongqing will be even greater. Judging from this, the legendary Whitebeard is probably the truly powerful one that makes people tremble and tremble. Next, it's time to go to the next level, so be serious. Shanks pointed at Yongqing with his slender western sword, with a smile in his eyes. Chapter 310 The Last Blow. As soon as the long sword turned, the tip of the sword was raised, pointing straight ahead. Yongqing's eyes became serious. This time, the two will never stand in the same place to fight again. Their battlefield has changed and it has become the entire sea area. Call. The breeze blew, and the two flashed their swords. Walking on the Reaper, he was still in the center of the deck a moment ago, but the next moment, he has appeared in front of Dylan's and others. One person bent down and jumped up and swept his sword across, while the other turned his back on Dylan's and raised his sword to meet him. Then, a strong wind blew by. Buzz. Dylan's face was covered with sweat, and the broken black hair fell to the ground. Looking at the two people who appeared on the boat ahead again, their hearts were beating violently. Hoo-hoo, startle me. When the sword energy was erratic just now, Dylan's was really worried that it would cross his neck. The speed of the two is beyond everyone's expectations, and the speed is unimaginable. At this moment, Yongqing's movement was shifting and unfolding on the entire Reaper. Shanks is also unimaginably fast. Their faces are cautious and serious, staring at each other's eyes carefully. Judging the opponent's next move by using the opponent's shoulders trembling, waist swinging, or turning his eyes, with the domineering look of seeing and hearing. This is a battle of wits and strength, and it is very complicated. As ordinary people, I am afraid that the two of them can easily end each other's life with just one sword move. In the eyes of the members of the red-haired pirates and the cadres of the Shinigami, the two were now competing in speed again. The last second, Yongqing was still behind Shanks, swaying his long sword. The next moment, Shanks' western sword had penetrated his body, smashing his phantom into pieces. Then again and again, the figures of the two walked almost every corner of the Reaper. Their sword energy were condensed in one place, but they didn't let out, but this time they didn't make the sea tattered. But the power is even more terrifying. It is conceivable that if a sword stabs or cuts through the opponent, it must be an unbearable consequence. This is a huge competition for situation analysis, power control, and psychological endurance. As long as the two are a little bit inferior to each other, or a little bit inferior to the other, then they must face an extremely difficult situation. The general situation of the normal battle will be defeated, and they will enter a dilemma. A minute later, they came to the ship of the red-haired pirates, and similarly transferred their swords, but the sword energy was condensed and not released. But at the same time, they are all solemn and silent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the battle between the two, and they all knew what a grand battle it was. It is not just a competition of pure power, but also contains its own will. This is a competition launched by two swordsmen with their belief in fighting and swords. Finally, a sword energy was ejected into the sky from the moment when the two long swords clashed. As if a gust of wind passed by, everyone was shocked to find that the dark clouds above their heads were broken, and they seemed to be fragmented, and the thunder rumbled. It's just the aftermath of the sword energy, but it has already caused such a big change in the sky. This scene changed the expressions of everyone present and sweated profusely. Although the attack strength of these two people has always been unrelenting, but at this moment, only a trace has made everyone terrified. Finally, the two got off the pirate ship and fought into the air. One is on top, one is on the bottom, and then the sword is quickly drawn. Buzz. The sword pressure emanated at this moment. Since it was on the sea, the two of them didn't need to spend any more effort to complete the unloading, but attacked directly. The sword pressure caused the seawater to spray up, like a big fountain. Climbing up more than 10 meters high, fine water droplets fell down, and a string of beautiful rainbows appeared in the air, which was very beautiful. Yongqing's face was solemn, and as Shanks' western sword was pressed down, his whole body was pressed down. After 3 breaths, he stepped on the left foot with his right foot, stepped on the stage with one foot, pressed down with the other foot, and made use of his strength, so that the falling body actually rose into the sky, and abruptly pressed against Shank's long sword. Superior. The tip of his toes was just a little bit of seawater, and his figure fluttered like a goose feather, heading towards the back. The captain is really amazing. He can still exert such strength when he has nowhere to use it. Drizzt laughed. Everyone in the red-haired pirates fell into contemplation after watching the scene just now. Yang Qing's method is indeed very clever, but no one can but say that he is very powerful. This is not something that anyone can accomplish. It is a rigid requirement for the muscles and even the meridians of the whole body. Otherwise, ordinary people try to jump in the air, and will they fly when one foot steps on the other? Don't throw a dog and eat shit, you come to me. The rainbow stood in the air, and the two of them were one after the other, as if suspended above the sea. This magical scene surprised everyone. After 3 breaths, Shanks struck Yang Qing in front of him again with a sword. When the 2 swords touched each other, and a great force spread out from the middle. Ha 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 ha, Shanks let out a long whistle, fluttered backwards and landed on the pirate ship. Yang Qing was swept away 20 meters away from the ship by the power of this sword. At the foot of the sea, the officers of the red-haired pirate ship had smiles on their faces. But the next moment, their eyes shrank again. This is the power of devil fruits. Seeing Yang Qing suspended in the air like a flat ground, they just remembered that this guy is still a terrifying devil fruit power user. Shanks' eyes narrowed, and there was a hint of heaviness in his eyes. Yang Qing was even more difficult to deal with than he imagined. Step by step towards. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Walking forward, Yang Qing stood on top of Shanks' head, condescending, with a smile in his eyes, and threw out a few sword flowers from the long sword in his right hand, and then pointed at the latter. The last blow. It's boring to fight like this, it's better than a banquet. I think you've had enough of your temptations. Shanks' eyes narrowed, then a smile appeared on his serious face, and he nodded, yes, enough. Then I'm here. Yang Qing shouted, and his body suddenly rushed down. As he swung his sword, Shanks also let out a loud roar, and suddenly swung out the western sword in his right hand. Bang! The huge sound was like a dull thunder, and the people who were lying on the boat and watching the battle almost fell to the ground. Then, everyone saw the red-haired pirate ship leaning over with a corner as the center. Around its ship, a series of explosions occurred, and countless water droplets rose into the sky. Boom 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 boom. Chapter 311 I Want to Be a Pirate. The continuous explosions stunned everyone on the Reaper, and the huge tremors on the sea caused the ship to sway from side to side, making it difficult for everyone to stand firm. Between the crystal water droplets, 2 figures gradually emerged. The icy blue blade shone with a beautiful psychedelic light in the sun, and the slender blade of the lower western sword was also maintained stably, resisting the monstrous force carried in the icy blue blade. This is the power that can crush and tear everything down. If you look closely, you can even see that the western long sword is covered with a dark substance. As time passed, it quietly dissipated. Yang Qing holds a sword in one hand, and his body is standing in the void with a foot on the deck. His sword is sharp and light. Shanks stared at each other's eyes tightly, and the sunset sword completely blocked the sword. The two were deadlocked with each other. After 5 breaths, Yang Qing withdrew and slowly retracted his Longchen sword. The next generation is terrifying. Shanks slowly retracted the sunset sword, inserted it into his scabbard, and his tone was a little emotional and a little complicated. Immediately afterwards, the two looked at each other and burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. Get on the boat, the banquet is ready. After many years, we have to get together. It's not fun here, I'll take you to my site for a walk. Shanks said loudly. Good. Yang Qing embarked on the Reaper, and Shanks walked side by side with it. Everyone looked at the fact that the two were still fighting a moment ago, but at this moment, it was as if nothing had happened. They were stunned at first, and then a smile appeared on their faces. When the two stepped onto the deck of the Reaper again, Beckman glanced at the place where the two had just fought. He just glanced at random, but it was this glance that made his pupils shrink suddenly. This kid. On the deck, the marks of the 2 feet were clearly visible. Yes, the footprints are shallow, but still clearly visible. In the duel just now, everyone could read it clearly. Yang Qing was in the sky, and Shanks was on the ground. Therefore, there is no need to doubt who these footprints belong to. Captain, you have fallen into a downwind. It was the last blow of the two, so there must be a huge power in that sword, which can be said to be the ultimate power that the two can exert. But in this duel, Shanks was clearly at a disadvantage. This scene made Beckman's heart full of shock. It's really incredible, that boy only went out to sea to meet the young man. How old are you? It already has such strength. This kid, do you want to become the Pirate King? Young means impulsive, means making mistakes. But it also represents endless potential. Shanks, Whitebeard, Kaido, Big Mom, why no one of the 4 contemporary peaks and peak emperors competes for the identity of One Piece? Embarrassed status is one reason, but equally, their potential has come to an end. They can't grow any longer, they can't become stronger. At this time, they can only be greeted by the strength of time, gradually weakening, rather than continuing to move forward. Since ancient times, vigilance is more difficult than starting a business, and it is easier to conquer the country, but it is not so simple to accept it. But Yang Qing, how big? After all, is he 30 years old? Obviously not. This kid is too young, too young. If in another 10 or 20 years, when he is 30 or 40 years old, his strength has reached its peak, what will he bring to the world? No one can guarantee this. Could it be that he will surpass One Piece? Beckman even gave birth to this terrible idea. His eyes were complicated, and while he was shocked, he could roughly understand the horror in Shanks' heart. Perhaps, Shanks is changing his mind. For the boy who Donghai met, Shanks was willing to give an arm to gamble on his future, but what would he do with Lucifer, who was already a king and was still his friend? Will you support him on his way to the throne? Next, on the Reaper, there was a celebratory banquet. A jar of wine was removed from the warehouses of the 2 ships, and their faces were full of smiles. Very happy, one after another pirates were sung aloud by them, accompanied by a strong smell of wine, spreading throughout the entire sea area. There's a girl, she's got a little. The discordant humming sound came out, and all the cadres on the Reaper looked towards Lanbas, with black lines all over their foreheads. Lanbas looked at everyone strangely, with a puzzled look on his face. Then the next moment, everyone joined together and gave this rough-looking man like a bear a savage beating. This song is too ugly, and I don't know who taught him. The old man and his granddaughter, Loli, watched the tall men on the deck sing loudly, not as ferocious as they imagined, nor as vicious as they imagined. In these pirates, they felt different breaths. Grandpa, I don't think they are bad people, Loli said cutely, her eyes fixed on Yang Qing who was sitting cross-legged in front of her. At that moment, the young man who fell from the sky made a deep impression on her. Huh, Loli. The old man was stunned for a moment, then pondered for a moment, then nodded. You are right, they are not bad people. Hee hee. Loli laughed happily. Then, she moved her calf and walked towards Yang Qing. In front, Yang Qing and Shanks were sitting on the ground, toasting each other. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. So, are you going to find Whitebeard next? That's right, I'll go to that old guy again, and my position will be solidified. Yang Qing said with a smile. Hee hee, old guy, this nickname is not bad. However, if that grumpy guy heard you call him that, he would probably jump. Shanks laughed. It doesn't matter, there will be a stop sooner or later. Yang Qing said with a smile. Yeah, Shanks toasted. The two clinked glasses again and then drank. At this moment, Yang Qing tilted his head, and a petite figure came over nervously. Little Loli, what's the matter with my brother here? Yang Qing smiled and said softly. Shanks put down the wine bowl and stared at the little girl with interest. Brother, me. Loli seemed nervous and couldn't say it. Huh. Yang Qing raised her eyebrows with a puzzled expression. I want to join you, and I want to be a pirate too. Lolita closed her eyes suddenly, and spoke out loud. Chapter 312 How is it possible? The little girl's voice was clear and melodious, causing the people present to sing and laugh into peace. The sharp voice was very obvious under the loud voices of everyone, so it was actually heard by the people present. As the lively voice returned to calm, the little girl opened her closed eyes. When she saw that everyone present was looking at her with a curious expression, her face turned red. A hearty smile appeared on Yang Qing's face, and in the unexpected expressions of everyone, he responded with a positive answer. Okay. Really? Loli couldn't believe it. She looked so cute. Of course, from today onwards, you are a female pirate. Yang Qing laughed loudly, a female pirate like Moria and Robin. Loli reacted and jumped happily. She jumped towards her grandfather, and then hugged her grandfather. Grandpa, did you hear that? I'm a pirate too, the captain promised Loli, hee. I heard it, Grandpa heard it, congratulations to little Loli. The old man said with a smile, but his eyes turned to the pirate flag fluttering in the wind at the top of the mast. If the old man remembers correctly, this pirate flag represents the legendary Wuhai pirate group, the god of death. Are they actually such a group of people? The turbid eyes swept across the crew members present, but they were all smiling faces, and shouting loudly, without a trace of the momentum that a vicious pirate should have. As for Yang Qing and Shanks, after experiencing the strange eyes of the captains, they talked again. You actually promised that little girl. Shanks was a little surprised and clinked glasses with Yang Qing. Why don't you agree? Yang Qing smiled. I have no reason to refuse to face the sea alone. The pirate industry is not a safe haven. Shanks' eyes narrowed, looking at Loli who was jumping happily and talking with his grandfather, and she is not only a woman, but also a child. Child? Yang Qing's eyes flashed with nostalgia. When I went to sea, I was only a child. Shanks was startled and nodded involuntarily. The environment in which we grow affects everything. In the greenhouse, the flowers that grow will wither as soon as the wind and rain are hit, and those that sway in the wind and rain will grow into towering trees. Yang Qing's voice contained magnetic and smiling. Since she has this idea, why don't I agree to her and make her happy? At this moment, after hearing Yang Qing's words, Shanks just realized the biggest difference between him and the other man. He liked Luffy, but after the other party proposed to become a pirate, he did not agree. But when he got to Yang Qing, this guy agreed. He didn't treat the other party as just a child, thinking that he couldn't bear everything and gave up. On the contrary, he was very tolerant and agreed with confidence. Sometimes, weak people are the strongest. Yang Qing sighed. Their will, their perseverance, and their perseverance are much stronger than many people who claim to be strong. Shanks, when you were weak, did you ever think that you would be the fourth emperor? Shanks was startled, lost in thought. I have to say that dreaming can really inspire a lot of human potential. Yang Qing shook his head. Power, wealth, fame, everything pursued in this world, is to whitewash its beauty with dreams, but one essence cannot be changed. Quote. What? Shanks asked in surprise. Human instinct. Yang Qing stretched out, shot, and then grabbed it suddenly. All these phenomena come from human instinct. When you are born, you will want to drink nigh, you will drink water when you are thirsty, and you will eat when you are hungry. These are all instincts, and dreams, the pursuit of everything, are also human instincts. So, what reason do we have to reject a person's instinctual demands? Yang Qing looked into Shanks' eyes with a smile in her eyes. In that little girl's eyes, I can see clearly that she really wants to be a pirate. Be a pirate like me. Like you. Shanks shook his head with a smile, only he knew how difficult it was to be someone of their level. Just like Ace wants to be the pirate king, that little girl also wants to be a pirate like me, living freely on this magnificent sea. Yang Qing looked at Ace. Influenced by Yang Qing, Shanks also turned to look. As that freckled boy, very good seedling, Shanks praised. People who can control the overlord color are naturally different. In Ace, he felt a rebellious, domineering the incomparable momentum seems familiar. Very good. Of course he is not bad. Yang Qing said with a smile, I want to train him into a new generation of One Piece. Forgot to mention, that guy is Luffy's brother. Really? Shanks widened his eyes, then laughed. I was on Luffy, and you actually pressed his brother. It seems that we have to bet on whose luck. There is actually only one reason for me to oppress him. Yang Qing smiled faintly, looking at Ace who was having fun with Drizzt, Usopp and others. He is born with the blood of the royal family. What do you mean? Shanks narrowed his eyes, feeling something. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. The importance of love. His name is Portgas D. Ace. He is the inheritor of D. Yang Qing spat out faintly, causing Shanks' pupils to shrink, but this was not over yet. The next sentence really shocked him, but he has another name. Brother Ace. He's Roger, the Pirate King, his own son. What? Shanks was shocked and even squeezed the wine bowl in his hand into 4 pieces. He stared at Yang Qing with wide eyes. He even felt that the blood in his whole body was boiling, and he felt that his heart was beating faster. The next moment, he grabbed Yang Qing's collar with one hand and roared loudly. Is what you said true? At this moment, Shanks was so excited that he couldn't control his emotions at all. There is no way not to be excited. That guy, the guy who made his tears flow and can't forget all his life, even has a son. How can that be? Chapter 313 _ I have no way to lie about this kind of thing. With a wry smile, Yang Qing put down the wine bowl. The crew members around saw that the 2 captains suddenly became so excited and a little confused, and then they turned their heads back the next moment and played happily again, ignoring everything here. That kid, yes, the captain's son. Shanks glared at Ace, as if to remember Ace's face in his heart. He was so excited that he couldn't even utter a complete sentence. Yes, definitely yes. Yang Qing nodded helplessly. Can you let go of your hand first? Shanks took a deep breath, then let go, and finally retracted his eyes. Then, he stared at Yang Qing's eyes. Who else knows this news? Shanks' tone was very solemn, and he regarded this matter as very important. The importance of this matter is obvious at a glance. If the Marines know about it, they will definitely pay all the costs to capture Ace. The bloodline of One Piece is absolutely intolerable in this world. At the moment, it's only me, and Carp. Yang Qing said softly, drinking a bowl of wine. Cap. Shanks fell silent, then wanted to find a bowl to drink, but found that the bowl had been crushed by him, but he didn't care. He directly picked up the wine jar beside him and drank. This incident was so shocking that he had to drink a sip of wine to suppress his shock. You have to protect him. This matter is really important, Shanks said solemnly. Yang Qing smiled bitterly and shrugged helplessly. Ace is my crew member, and I will naturally protect him. Shanks also laughed. That's right, that kid is your second team now, so of course I'll leave it to you. Afterwards, the two started drinking. Glades, meals kept coming up. The meat of the Sea Kings exuded a strong aroma, and the pirates on both ships let go and celebrated. Of course, it's not just about eating. When 2 pirate groups with similar strength came together, they were releasing a message to the outside world. Alliance. Without a doubt, this is alliance information. If the pirates meet and don't fight, they are friends. This is beyond doubt. At this moment, the redhead, one of the 4 emperors, met with the overlord of the New World, who had just defeated Kaido's team of death, and they didn't fight, but sat together drinking and chatting. This caused the forces lurking in unknown places to immediately spread the news, causing countless outsiders to be stunned. Immediately afterwards, newspapers were distributed, and this speed and efficiency were terrifying. It's just that in the afternoon when the 2 pirate groups celebrated, the news spread widely throughout the world. What? The god of death and the red hair of the four emperors unite. What are you talking about? That terrifying death boy did not fight with the four emperors' red hair, but joined together to form an alliance. Mom, this world is about to change again. The four emperors have always been independent and hostile to each other, and there has never been a word of unity, but suddenly a death boy pops up, and this balance will be broken, which is even more terrifying. The thing is, the red hair of the four emperors has actually gained the support of the Grim Reaper, so it must be a huge threat to the other three pirate groups. Is the era of One Piece Roger coming again? This time, sea soldiers, it is absolutely impossible to tolerate it any longer. Lucifer's Wuhai identity will definitely be downgraded soon. His identity is too sensitive, and it is completely unsuitable for him to be Wuhai's identity. But I think that boy, I am afraid that he will no longer care about Wuhai at this time. Identity. Yeah, his reputation, wealth, and power are no longer supported by Wuhai's identity. Instead, Wuhai is relying on his glory. The world once again caused an uproar, and the encounter of the two pirate groups made the forces around the world tremble. The two pirate groups in the center of the storm, the birthplace, after celebrating, launched their ships and sailed forward. On the bow of the boat, little Lolita lay on Lanba's shoulders and waved at her grandfather. Grandpa, goodbye, Loli will come back. Little Loli cried very sadly, but she was still strong and waved goodbye to her grandfather. Lori, come on, I want to become a real pirate. The old man stood on the new boat sent to him by the death god and shook his hands vigorously, his nose was sour. Soon, the two ships roared and moved slowly. The old man sighed only when he saw the two ships disappear in front of his eyes. This time, it's just me and her milk and milk. Thinking about it, it's really a bit sour in my heart. After being silent again, forgetting the sea level for about 3 minutes, the old man bent down and rowed the boat towards the shore. The two ships were heading towards the waters of the Red Hair Pirates, and they were going to the island where the Red Hair was staying to celebrate again. It is also the cultivation after the battle with Kaido, because next, the Death God group will face the more powerful Whitebeard pirates. Just as they were advancing, a small boat burning with blue flames, only 3 meters wide and 5 meters long, followed the sea and quickly drifted towards the place where the Red Hair was. The man above had a long knife on the back with a cross-shaped handle, which was very wide. He wore a black top hat on his head, and was dressed in a neat suit. His expression was indifferent, and his dress was meticulous and dignified. And his eyes were sharp eagle eyes. Exactly. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. One of the Wuhai, Hawkeye Mahawk. At the same time, at the New World, a cannon sound finally sounded, and after a period of calm, more and more Marines poured into this place. On this day, they brazenly launched an attack on the next island. Hit me. It must be shot down. No matter what the price is, this island must be in the hands of our Navy, and it must be in the hands of justice. The Lieutenant General with the national character face, standing on the bow of the ship, roared loudly. Beside him are nearly 50 warships, on which are densely packed with sailors. Their faces are serious and nervous, and they are attacking the pirate fleet on the opposite side. Shish. One after another gunpowder smoke swept across the sky, and there was a strong smell of artillery fire. The Navy has attacked. Quickly start Plan A. This island, we will not allow an inch of land. Whatever it takes. It's time to let them know the strength of my Death God pirates. Chapter 314 More than 200. The sea soldiers waited solemnly, the blood in their bodies was boiling, and at this moment, their whole body was surging with restless factors. This is a war, and for the Marines, a vital battle. Taking down the island in front means that the Navy has completely established his position at the entrance. Cooperate with the power of the depths of this new world, and the roads governed by the Navy of the Red Earth continent. Then, the Navy will have the upper hand. They will leave a solid footprint in this era. They will be able to end this runaway era, and let the era of pirates go from frenzy to complete peace. This is a game, and a game that must be won. Lose. They can't afford to lose. Once this battle fails, they will completely offend the death gods and they will lose face in the whole world. This serious problem is enough to discredit them. Kill. There were bursts of shouts of killing from above the sea, and the Marines, whether it was the lieutenant general or the major, rushed forward excitedly at this moment. At this moment, they were all soldiers. Soldiers should throw their heads, shed blood, fight on the battlefield, and shed blood and sweat. On the opposite side, at the island port, the densely packed pirate ships also roared at this moment. Mad, we let them have 3 islands. It's really easy to be bullied by lousy brothers. This time, don't let them anymore. Let these grandchildren taste the power of our death. Our bottom line has been reached, and this time, not a single step will be allowed. With the strength of 3 islands gathered, if you still can't defend against these bastards' attacks, I will take off the head and use it as a urinal for myself. Fuck you guys. Mention the guys and fuck them to death. On the 3 islands before, at least the 50 Thieves pirates ship was moored. Before joining the Death God pirates, these pirates were independent. In other words, every one of their pirate ships is a pirate group. But at this moment, on the at least 50 pirate ships, groups of pirates also erupted. The power of the 3 islands is combined, and the power added by the headquarters to these pirates. At this moment, the accumulated power is already extremely terrifying. Boom boom boom. A series of shelling sounds came out, and the whole sea area was shaking. The fish in the sea were all afraid, and quickly dived towards the bottom of the deep sea. The huge fleet was just a meeting, and several ships had their masts broken, and the flames soared into the sky. In such a big scene, the combat capability of an individual soldier can only play a role after contact, but at a long distance, it depends on whose artillery fire is more powerful. On the Reaper, there is a big man with a crosshair in one eye, a national character with a baseball cap, an automatic rifle, and a sharp light flashes in his eyes. Align the crosshair and pull the trigger. Bang! At the moment when the gunshots sounded, a lieutenant general fell to the ground on the bow of the warship several kilometers away on the opposite side, causing a shock and noise from the surrounding Marines. 1. The indifferent words spit out, and the big man with the national character changed his target. Then, align and pull the trigger again. Bang! Again, a colonel fell to the ground. 2. 10 consecutive shots fired, and 10 sailors fell to the ground. In the eyes of this big man, the position of the Navy seemed to have no effect at all. Under his guns, there are only ghosts. Mofa, your marksmanship has improved again. The companions beside him sighed in admiration. Mofa's skills, these people clearly see in their eyes, and their precise marksmanship will surprise anyone. Not yet, at the general level, I can't hurt them at all. Mofa shook his head indifferently, and turned his eyes to a figure in the warship group. The figure was wearing sunglasses and a plaid shirt with a funny expression, but standing at the bow, no attack or stray bullet could hit him. Kazuna. Mofa's eyes narrowed. And, stronger than me, there are many in our pirate group. Mofa said the next sentence, and the crew members beside him also looked at the pirate ships on both sides. Almost every pirate put on, there will be 2 or 3 figures standing upright with awe-inspiring eyes at this moment. In the face of this unremarkable battle, these people were not panicked, and their faces were full of confidence and arrogance. What are pirates? Pirates are the freest guys on the sea, they are not afraid of all challenges. 5 minutes later, the 2 sides made contact with each other, and the troops in front quickly collided in one place. Then, war broke out. Boom! The sound of explosions began to sound continuously, and bursts of fireworks burned everywhere. There were screams, excited roars, and all kinds of weird sounds. Some people are afraid, but some people like this scene. This is very normal. In the face of death, human instinct, nature will always burst out. Kizaru watched the war, raised his brows slightly, and pursed the corners of his mouth. The strength of the Death God gang is beyond my expectations. He stepped forward, ready to support him. But at the same time as he moved, 10 figures flew out from the pirate ship of the Reaper, and fell heavily around him, making the sailors on the whole ship feel like they were facing a great enemy and were nervous. Stand up. Don't move around, Kizaru. One of the 10 figures was indifferent, and the spear pointed directly at the general. His expression was also unusually indifferent, but without fear. It's amazing, die. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. God Pirates. Kazuna sighed, feeling a little tricky. He is not afraid of each of the 10 guys in front of him, but if 10 people gather together, it will be troublesome. These people have mastered the existence of two-color domineering, and can effectively restrain his fruit. The ghost knows where this group of people mastered the domineering cultivation method. The domineering popularity rate of the Death God Pirates is so high that it is hard for Kizaru to imagine. Moreover, after crossing these 10 people, he walked towards the pirate group, and immediately discovered that there were at least 100 figures, all exuding a terrifying aura, proving their strength, which was extremely terrifying. The old man glanced at it. There are 50 or 60 devil fruit people, I am really surprised. Huang Yuanzui said in surprise. His face casually said. 50 or 60. Ha ha ha, old guy, we have more than 200 devil fruit abilities. Chapter 315 Eagle Eye arrives. Leave this old guy to me, and you go and deal with the others. Do you think it's possible? The 10 pirates of the Death God group who surrounded Kyabu, one person and one word, actually started to talk. Huang Yuan's eyes flashed, and he also laughed. However, his smile contained a cold chill. The dignified general was so underestimated, you can imagine how angry this veteran general was. I think you should give it a try, it's like being kicked by the speed of light. The dazzling light began to shine, and in almost an instant, Kizaru disappeared. At the same time, the expression of one of the 10 people changed drastically. In front of his eyes, a foot filled with brilliance appeared, so shaking that he couldn't open his eyes. His reaction was extremely fast, and he immediately pulled out the long knife around his waist with one hand, blocking the path of the bare feet. At the same time as the bare feet kicked down, the man's knife was also blocked in front. But the next moment, there was a bang explosion, and the man with the long knife barely paused, and directly led out a deep pit on the deck of the warship, and then fell heavily on the sea, and in an instant disappeared. Seeing this scene, the other 9 figures suddenly changed their faces and became solemn. Old man, you are underestimating you. Extreme speed always brings enormous power. Speed is quality, but also power. Acting at the speed of light, how terrifying that is. Coupled with the power of Kizaru itself, it is simply not something that ordinary pirates can resist. The 9 people didn't ridicule again this time, and everyone's eyes were very solemn. I just complimented you, don't you know that the sky is high and the earth is thick? Huang Yuan smiled, but the smile was full of gloom. In the next moment, his body shone with brilliance again. Attack. At the same time, various fruit abilities, swords swept through the void, and attacked towards the yellow monkey. It's terrifying. Kizaru also became serious. A group of domineering guys attacking him together, and these people are all veterans, it is not easy. A 9-to-1 small-scale war has begun. Elsewhere, battles between crew and crew have also begun. The combat power of the lieutenant general level was stopped by the powerful crew. At the beginning of the war, the Reaper group had already parked the ship on the small island where the red-haired pirate ship was moored. Is this the island you're staying on temporarily? Yang Qing and his group got off the pirate ship, glanced around, and said with some disgust, it's really desolate. Shanks laughed out loud. Of course I can't compare to Whitebeard here, Kaido and the others are so rich. Shanks is the poorest guy among the 4 emperors. Beckman teased, and smiles appeared on everyone's faces. Ha ha ha, Shanks, you scumbag, I'm afraid you don't have as much wealth as my team. Bucky started mocking Shanks without hesitation at this moment, causing Yang Qing's face to suddenly turn smiled. Bucky, you. Shanks couldn't laugh or cry, he also knew that Bucky was not weak now. As the captain of the 1st Division of the Death Pirates, Bucky's strength is also very terrifying. In other words, the current Bucky is very promising. Enough is enough for you. Shanks is already poor. If he does this again, he will be mad. Yang Qing filled the fire, which made everyone even more discussing. Shanks smiled bitterly, but didn't resist much. At this moment, the voice of a phone bug rang in Yang Qing's arms. Blue blue blue. The sound continued to sound, which seemed very pleasant. Everyone's faces were startled, and Shanks looked at Yang Qing. Extending his hand into his arms, Yang Qing took out a small golden phone bug in the next second. Hello, Yang Qing asked after connecting. Captain, it's me, Glass. A young voice came from the phone bug. Let's talk. Yang Qing's voice was very casual. Navy attacked us. Glass took a breath and said seriously. Oh, I understand. Yang Qing nodded, her expression did not change at all. Above. After Glass finished speaking, he hung up the phone neatly and didn't say anything else. Yang Qing put the phone bug in his arms, looked at everyone's doubtful eyes, smiled and said, the sea soldiers felt that those little guys were a little bored, so they filled the fire and let them move around. Dylan's eyes flashed, and he understood what was going on. At this time, other people naturally understood that their backyard was on fire. Some people's eyes flashed a cold light, some people's eyes were awe-inspiring, and some people didn't care too much. On this day, when they set off, they already understood. Marines, there is a great possibility to attack them. This is not something that the World Court, or even all political means, can distort or change. Warring States is not the kind of person who only obeys his superiors in everything. He has his own opinions and his own judgments. Come on, let's continue to celebrate. Next, I still have a lot of things to do. The first half of Yang Qing's voice was still very relaxed, but the second half was already a little heavy. Then let's celebrate. A new banquet begins again, but this time the host is Shanks. The way of etiquette, pay attention to your coming and going. Yang Qing had just become the master, but this time it was Shanks, which was quite interesting. 3. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Days later, another guest was welcomed to the red-haired island. The Grim Reaper group and the red-haired group were bored playing games. A small boat, burning with blue flames, floated towards the coast like a ghost ship. So, is that a ghost? A new crew member said with some fear when they saw the ghost-like ship with no sails and no power source. You kid, are you embarrassed in fear? Behind us, there are the 4 Emperors Red Hair and the Overlord Death, what are you afraid of? The teammates who followed him immediately patted him on the head and made him shrink. Yes, who will be the opponents of these two? As the boat got closer and closer, the 2 people on guard finally saw the figure on the boat clearly. A black hat, a suit, a serious and indifferent expression, and those symbolic eyes. A pair of sharp eyes like an eagle. Chapter 316 Swordsman Showdown. Eagle, eagle, eagle eye, Mahawk. The 2 pirates were horrified and inexplicable, how could this guy suddenly come here? The #1 swordsman in the world does not only represent his reputation. There is no vacuous person under the prestigious name, if there is, it is already dead and can no longer die. In this real world, having a great reputation can only represent one thing. That is, that person definitely has the power in line with the reputation. Quick, 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 tell the captain about this. The pirate standing a little later panicked, and the fearful pirate in front of him turned around and ran towards the island. On the island, everyone is sitting and playing and chatting. But at this moment, a cry rang out. Captain, Captain! Shanks' eyes flashed, and he turned his head to look at the pirate coming from far and near. His face became serious. Hawkeye, Mahawk is here. The pirates hadn't run over yet, but the news had already reached the ears of everyone present, causing their expressions to change, and the smiles on their faces slowly dissipated. Oh, that guy! Shanks' eyes narrowed, and an inexplicable smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Yang Qing's face twitched, and he scolded inwardly, "Why did that guy get here?" Yang Qing was deeply impressed by Mahak, Chambord archipelago grips, and acquaintances. All the time, in Yang Qing's eyes, this guy is a pervert with a strong base rot. Of course, this is entirely Yang Qing's misunderstanding. Hakai Mahak, well, to be precise, there should be no problem with his Xing orientation. For Yang Qing, Mahak is more of a sympathy for his opponent. The boat slowly docked on the shore, and the crew members stationed on the shore were panicked when they saw the figure on the boat picking up the huge broad knife. As the black-clothed man with the knife on his back moved forward, he involuntarily started to retreat toward the rear, and finally, because of fear, legs were weak and buttocks sat on the ground. Hakai ignored the fearful crew members and just took a step toward the depths of the island. After stepping over the terrified crew member, Hakai left here in a few steps. A minute later, he slowly came to the front of the two groups of people who were either sitting cross-legged, standing, or half-squatting on the ground. Glancing at the faces staring at him in front of him, an interesting light flashed in the sharp eyes of the eagle, the corners of his mouth slanted upward, and then he first looked at Shanks. "Looks like you've had a good time lately." His voice was low, magnetic and manly. Shanks grinned. "Not bad. Is there any progress in swordsmanship?" Hakai asked. Yes. Shanks scratched his head, but he was a little uncertain. Hakai's gaze directly ignored Shanks and looked at Yang Qing beside him, making the latter's eyes flicker, avoiding the former's sight. "I can already feel your sword intent." Yang Qing was stunned and looked up at Hakai. However, he found that the former's eyes were full of depth, as if he had seen through him, full of fighting intent. "As expected of my favorite opponent," Hakai said again, causing Yang Qing's whole body to tremble and feel a little uncomfortable. The strong base rot smell swept out again, covering Yang Qing's body. "Let's fight." Hakai directly pulled out the long knife behind him. The dark knife did not reflect the slightest under the sun. It was the famous black knife in the world, the Knight. One of the 12 supreme swordsmen, the most powerful black sword in the world, with a random blade and a heavy flower T-shaped, it is a sword that fits the identity of the world's strongest swordsman. At the moment when Hakai showed the long knife, everyone present changed their expressions slightly. Hey, you don't mean to destroy my home, do you?" Shanks shouted. Yang Qing narrowed his eyes and stared at the guy in front of him. From the other side's eyes, he saw a strong will to fight. This guy is really too lonely. Invincible is the loneliest, standing in the swordsman's position, all you can experience is endless loneliness. No one has fought against him. In terms of swordsmanship, this guy is truly the pinnacle. He has reached the pinnacle of the pirate world. Like Whitebeard, he is the strongest in the world. This guy is also in the field of swordsmanship. Also the strongest. After pondering for a while, Yang Qing nodded in surprise in the eyes of everyone. "Okay, I promise you. Captain. Boss. Lucifer, you. Dylan's, Drizzt and Shanks all shouted. They all know what kind of pressure Yang Qing will face next. The strongest man in the world, Whitebeard. But on the eve of this battle, they agreed to Hakai's duel. This is not a joke, no one knows what Hakai's strength is. But just by virtue of its #1 name in the world, it can be seen. But at this moment, in the eyes of the two confronting people, there is only each other, only the knives in each other's hands. Anyone's persuasion is useless." Seeing this scene, Shanks and Dylan's roared. "Hurry up and disperse, these two guys, they are really hateful. Let's step back and make room for them, their battle is not easy." Soon, everyone set aside a kilometer square for the two of them. They stood on the grass, under the big trees, and the shadow of the sun shone through the mottled leaves, giving marks to the ground and their robes. For a while, the two did not open. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Start fighting. After Hakai slowly pulled out the knife, he placed it in front of him and took a stance. And Yang Qing didn't even move, his sword was still in the scabbard. "Start," Hawkeye said solemnly. "Why don't you draw your sword?" "Have you never heard of a sword technique called sword drawing?" Yang Qing said with a smile. "So it is." Hawkeye nodded, and a fierce light was reflected in the eagle-like pupil. Sword intent came out from Yang Qing's body and filled his body. The Longchen sword behind him began to hum and vibrate. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. The long sword behind Yang Qing trembled and trembled more and more violently. 4 breaths and 5 breaths. It seems that at any moment, this long sword will spew out, and it has accumulated to the extreme. "I'm here." At this moment, a dazzling ray of light shot out from Hawkeye's pupils, and a touch of domineering sword intent spread out, making the expressions of those watching the battle change drastically. At the same time, Yang Qing's eyes suddenly widened, and his hand trembled, and it moved. Chapter 317 Excited. Compared with Shanks, there is no doubt that Mihawk is a pure swordsman. Even this guy is purer than Yang Qing. In terms of power attributes, Yang Qing is a comprehensive warrior. He knows swordsmanship and devil fruit. He is also powerful, and he can also be domineering in 3 colors. It can be said that his various strengths are all consummate, very comprehensive, and almost no shortcomings can be found. However, Mihawk, who specializes in one, is more powerful. Only by focusing on the sword can one be stronger than the sword. Hawkeye Mihawk can be said to have practiced the swordsmanship of the pirate world to the pinnacle. He was at the pinnacle of swordsmanship, and there was no one else above his head. Almost at the moment Mihawk moved, his figure was already behind Yang Qing. At this moment, in the eyes of outsiders, it seems that the sword is pulling Mihawk's body to move, not the sword that moves after the body moves as usual. "This guy." Shank's pupils shrank, shocked. Behind Yang Qing, the long Quanjian automatically unsheathed and was flush with the back of Yang Qing's head. At the same time, his waist was twisted suddenly, and his figure suddenly turned around. The right hand was only grasped by feeling, and the long sword was still 3 rounds away from his palm at the moment, but the next moment, the scene that made Hawkeye's pupils shrink happened. When the ice blue blade was unsheathed, it spontaneously moved towards Yang Qing's hand. When the blade came out of the scabbard, Yang Qing's hand was bent strangely, but he firmly held the hilt in his hand. Then, suddenly stabbed. Ding! The crisp sound of the sword sounded, and Eagle Eye watched the ice blue blade of the sword that touched the tip of his own, forming a 90-degree angle. A dignified look flashed in his eyes. Compared to last time, the swordsmanship of the guy in front of him has improved a lot. Man and sword are one. The long sword just now moved spontaneously, which was clearly achieved by the opponent who had already cultivated the realm of swordsmanship to a very deep realm. At this moment, Yang Qing turned around and faced Hawkeye. His right hand held the hilt of the sword and raised it high, with the tip of the sword pointing straight to the ground. Hawkeye held the sword in one hand, stabbing forward, and the blade was parallel to the ground. However, the tips of the 2 swords just touched at this moment, and Yang Qing's stab accurately blocked Hawkeye's stab. This kind of ingenuity, even an outsider must be amazed. The next moment, the eagle-eyed long sword turned slightly and slid across Yang Qing's sword tip, making a harsh rubbing sound. In just 3 seconds, the tip of his sword changed more than 30 positions, and then stabbed towards Yang Qing's shang mouth. Yang Qing smiled and turned his wrist. The sword flower bloomed on the long spring sword, the sword wheel circled, and the eagle-eyed black knife was immediately repelled. After taking 3 steps back, the tip of Yang Qing's sword trembled and placed a comfortable stake. The opposite Hawkeye is also solemnly holding a sword with one hand, aiming at Yang Qing. In the short 2 strokes, they have already demonstrated the extremely high-end swordsmanship attainments of the 2. Regarding the judgment and transformation of the sword, the 2 have almost reached an unimaginable state. It was only at this time that a terrifying sword intent spread from the 2 of them. Buzz! The dust on the ground trembled, the branches and leaves of countless flowers and plants were broken, and the leaves above their heads began to drift down. When the leaves reached the center of the 2, they both squinted and set off. Ding! The tips of the swords faced each other again, and a leaf was cruelly divided into 8 petals and scattered all over the place. Then, with swords and swords, the two started a duel. The long sword spun rapidly between the wrists, and the light tip of the sword was capable of terrifying power. This power is enough to overturn mountains and destroy everything. Placed in the center of the storm, the expressions of the two were quite calm, and they looked straight ahead. There are only countless sword shadows in his eyes, the traces of this moment, and where they will reach the next moment. At this moment, when the two judged each other's sword moves, and not only relying on each other's eyes to see, but also felt in their hearts. Rather, it is a prediction of where the opponent's next sword will go, its traces, its strength, and its degree of transformation. This is a battle of strength, mind and experience. Compared with the Shanks one, the two were more attentive. In the blink of an eye, a minute passed, and the two of them made a total of 1,234 moves. Beside them, the big tree rumbled and broke into countless pieces of wood after 3 breaths, the leaves were falling all over the sky, and dust was flying. The sword intent spread to 3,000 meters, and the crowd of onlookers forced to retreat a long distance to the rear. This battle allowed both sides to have a rough judgment on each other's strength. Next, it's time to get serious. Hawkeye said indifferently, this kind of boring temptation can no longer make the blood in my body boil. As boring as fighting Shanks. The indifferent words caused Shanks, who was watching the battle, to give a wry smile and touch his nose. You must know that their battle was highly praised by Whitebeard. He's not that bad, is he? Yang Qing's eyes narrowed, and then he inserted the ice blue Longchen sword on the ground in front of him. I'm sorry, Mahawk, because a battle is about to start, and it's impossible for me to play with you for too long. After all, fighting against a master like you, every second I advance, my consumption will be extremely huge. Next, let you see the sword move I recently learned. Hawkeye's eyes narrowed, and then he smiled. I can't ask for it. Experts are lonely, and this peak-to-peak duel can only be enjoyable if you do your best. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. The next moment, Yang Qing narrowed his eyes, and then, his robe suddenly moved without wind. Is that trick? Dylan's eyes narrowed and he was surprised. That's right, the captain really has to use a trick. Drizzt also nodded. Shanks and the others looked at the surprised eyes of Death and the others, and became curious. What kind of tricks would make this group of people so shocked? Sword 23. Very calmly, these 4 words were spit out from Yang Qing's mouth, and in the next second, endless sword intent suddenly burst out from his body. This sword intent is so terrifying, almost instantly, the space of the entire island is fluctuating. All the people watching the battle change their faces. In Hawkeye's always sharp and calm eyes, at this moment, looking at the figure in front of him with his eyes closed, he was also excited. Sure enough. Such a terrifying sword intent really makes me so excited. Chapter 318 The Strongest Sword. As a top swordsman, Hawkeye's sense of sword intent is extremely sensitive. At this moment, the sharp sword-like sword intent emanating from Yang Qing's body cut everything around him. This cutting has not yet been carried out, but the sword has been placed on the neck of everything. This means that as long as Yang Qing nods, that sword-like sword intent can shatter everything around him. This is extremely bright, extremely beautiful, but also extremely dangerous sword intent. The heart has the tigers, fine sniffing the rose. Yang Qing's sword intent erupted at this moment, but he did not damage everything around him. His sword intent contained sharp and even devastating blows, but it gave people a gentle feeling like being blown by a breeze. All kinds of signs are undoubtedly proving that his control of swordsmanship and sword intent has reached an unimaginable realm. Hawkeye's whole body tightened in an instant, his eyes narrowed, and the expression on his face was extraordinarily solemn. He grabbed the hilt of the sword with both hands, and set up a sword stake, which could meet Yang Qing's attack from any direction. But at the next moment, something even more surprising happened to him. His pupils suddenly widened, and his heart beat faster. This is heart, sword, unity. Or, heart and sword separate. It really shocked Hawkeye. At this moment, a more majestic sword intent surged out of Yang Qing's body. This sword intent seemed to gather his spiritual will, and then twisted and floated out from his eyebrows, appearing in the void. After 3 breaths, within a radius of 3 kilometers, the diffuse sword intent suddenly gathered. After a breath, a dazzling figure flashing brightly appeared in everyone's eyes. That is, another Yang Qing. Buzzing. The ice-blue Longchen sword trembled, and was transferred from Yang Qing's hand to the newly appeared sword body, and he held the hilt firmly. The sword intent was soaring to the sky, and at the moment when the new Yang Qing appeared, the entire space was distorted by this sword intent. This is a huge pressure. At this moment, everyone feels a slender blade in front of their necks, and there is a feeling that they can't move no matter what. This kid. Shanks widened his eyes, shocked. No wonder he was able to beat that guy Kaido. The trick the captain used to defeat Kaido was actually used here. Drizzt said in shock. That guy with the eagle eye can actually make the old ambassador make this move, it's quite powerful. Bucky exclaimed. How powerful is this move by Yang Qing? They who have observed it are more clear. That is almost called invincible swordsmanship. Once this sword is out, no one is invincible. Step by step, Yang Qing's body pressed on the flowers and plants, but did not bend the latter, as if his body had no weight. This strange scene made Hawkeye's pupils shrink and his heart became heavy. Have you fused the sword intent with your own soul? What a genius! Flames burned in Hawkeye's eyes, which was an excited flame. When a peerless swordsman standing on the top of a mountain, suddenly found that there was another person at his height. His heart throbbed, it was a desire to climb. He will go to higher places and stand higher. A master is lonely. If there is someone stronger than himself, then he is no longer lonely, all he has is excitement. The blood boiled in my heart, and my heart that had been silent for a long time began to pulsate. Above the eagle-eyed black knife, there was a buzzing humming, sword intent, another breath that was different from Yang Qing's sword intent surging, and it is getting more and more surging, rolling towards the surrounding release, like rivers, lakes and seas flowing. Hawkeye, you really deserve to be the #1 swordsman in this world. In the face of GN23, you are still so confident. Looking at the eagle eyes full of fighting spirit on the opposite side, Yang Qing stepped out, swung his long sword and pointed it directly at the opponent. The ice-blue blade released a chill, a trace of cold air was blooming, and the majesty of the terrifying sword intent was even higher. In the eyes of everyone watching this battle, the 100-meter space in which the two people were constantly distorted and became a little blurry. The sword intent of these two guys is really terrifying. Shanks and the others looked at in shock. Just the suppression of sword intent makes the space seem unbearable. Dylan's pupils stared at the space. After 3 breaths, Yang Qing had already taken 5 steps. As he advanced, the sword intent on his body became even more terrifying. At this moment, Hawkeye felt as if thousands of icy long swords were pointing directly at him, and his whole body trembled. This was a feeling of death anytime, anywhere, which was extremely terrifying. Even he was a little heavy under the pressure of such a sword. This is my sword god domain. Here, everything is only the sword, and all swords are under my control. Here, I am invincible. Yang Qing walked, the Longchen sword in his right hand trembled, and the sword intent was vertical and horizontal, and the space in front of him seemed to be about to have a black spot, as if it was pierced. This is the last sword, and it is also my respect for you, the #1 swordsman in the world. Mahawk, do you dare to take it? At this moment, the two were only 10 steps away. Yang Qing pointed at each other with a sword in one hand. Mahawk held a sword in both hands, posing a serious and dignified posture. I'm so excited. Come on. Let me teach you this trick. Sword 23. Mahawk roared loudly, unimaginably calm on this weekday. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Serious, meticulous guy, can have such a crazy scene. This may be the uncontrollable throbbing in my heart after having an opponent. Yang Qing's eyes narrowed, and the ice blue long sword in his eyes suddenly slammed. Sing! A crisp sword sound rang out, spreading throughout the island. In an instant, the space changed from being twisted to multiple vortexes that began to rotate slowly. Countless fallen leaves, trees, flowers and plants burst into pieces at this moment. Ha! Mahak bent down again, bent his knees, held the sword in both hands, and exerted extra strength. The next moment, his figure disappeared suddenly. Ding! A little sound of gold and iron came out, like a bell, followed by ding 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 ding. The continuous collision sounded, and the two seemed to have launched countless attacks and defenses in an instant. The scope of the space distortion is even larger, spreading in all directions. Chapter 319 Defeat. A sword energy shot out from the twisted space species, then swept across the void, and slammed into the crowd of onlookers. Dylan's broke out in cold sweat instantly, tilted his head to the side, his black hair was broken, and his sword energy ran towards the back. Be careful! The loud shouts spread throughout the audience, and the atmosphere suddenly became tense. Dylan's turned his head immediately, and then saw that the sword chi that he had avoided was actually rushing towards Bucky at the back. It can be clearly seen that Bucky has changed from the state of watching the battle on his face to the state of panic now. Fuck! Only these two words can express the feeling in Bucky's heart. Then, before he could react, that sword energy had already hit him. Puff puff puff. Sword chi entered the body, and a series of sounds came out. After that, Dylan's could clearly see that the whole body of the red nose was cracked, evenly distributed, the cracks were neat and brilliant, and even his red nose was divided into 4 parts. Bucky, Bucky! Glades shouted, full of worry. Time seemed to stop for 2 seconds. Bucky was cut into countless parts, and they were paved on the ground, but strangely, no blood came out. He will be fine. This guy has the ability to tear apart the fruit. I don't know, the sword energy of those two people, who knows if they will die. Luo and Corazon spoke quickly in a low voice. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Bucky's body, and then they were all relieved. Bucky, who was cut into countless parts, began to wriggle in the next moment, and then began to splicing together. Almost died. These two guys don't care about me at all. Bucky roared. That is him. This sword chi is replaced by any one person. I am afraid that he will die and can no longer die. Just looking at the moment of being attacked into the body, it was split into countless parts, and you can imagine the power of this sword chi. Focusing their eyes on the distorted space again, people can only vaguely see the distortion. The figures of the two are constantly moving, and the phantoms of the sword are endless. Yang Qing swung out a sword, the wind gusted wildly, a huge sword wheel bloomed, and then fell on Hawkeye's body with a shadow. He attacked with ease and casualness, as if he just moved casually. Looking at Hawkeye, the sweat on his forehead began to fall continuously, and the muscles of his whole body seemed to be unbearable under this high-intensity collision. But his black knife was still like a trend in the night sky, flashing by, incredibly fast. Yang Qing with the sword body is even more difficult to deal with. Eagle-eyed Mahak not only has to defend against his own endless and ever-changing sword body attacks, but also has to withstand the sword intent attacks that swept from all over his body all the time. These sword intent attacks are hard to guard against. They will appear at any time, and it is difficult to defend against them. Moreover, the power is not inferior to the sword body attack. And Yang Qing here, also praised in his heart, Eagle Eye is worthy of being the world's largest swordsman. Every time he hit, the opponent took it perfectly. Unlike Kaido, the opponent can only passively accept his own attack, but he can't even touch him. Hawkeye, however, took every attack he made with his keen sense. Moreover, the strength and destructive power are comparable, completely offsetting his attack. What a great guy! However, Yang Qing finally shook his head. It's very good, but unfortunately, my physical strength is about to bottom out. That's right, Mahak's kendo, judgment, and experience are all excellent, reaching the top position in the world. However, in the face of Yang Qing's endless attacks, it still couldn't be consumed. Sword 23 is itself invincible, and it is impossible to lose with invincibility. Moreover, his sword intent and sword chi are endless, originating from the spirit's control over the transformation of energy between heaven, earth and all things. At this moment, it's just a small fight, and it hasn't cost as much as the one with Kaido. However, Hawkeye couldn't stand it anymore. His stamina bottomed out, and the cells in his body were boiling, making unsupportive tweets. Finally, Yang Qing drew his sword and stood. A round of ice blue sword wheels bloomed around Mihawk. The body of the sword kept trembling and shaking. The tip of the sword pointed directly at Mihawk in the middle. Then, it made a humming sound, and the next moment, it slammed down. Ah! Mihawk roared wildly, and the black knife in his hand burst out with endless strength again, attacking the sword wheels in all directions. Dang 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 dang. A series of sounds came out, and every time a knife was cut out, the ice blue long sword in the sword wheel disappeared. After 365 knives, the sword wheel disappeared in front of Mihawk. But he also bent down and gasped violently. Is it all right? Yang Qing said with a smile. His tone was relaxed and did not consume any strength. Mihawk raised his head, his cheeks were full of sweat, and he was completely shocked by the power possessed by Yang Qing. No, I want to try again, I want to know how powerful you are. Mihawk gasped, his eyes full of determination. Yang Qing was stunned for a moment, then pondered for a moment, then said with a smile, I understand. The dignity of a swordsman should be respected for the strong. With a flick of his sword, he thrust forward. With this stab, the space of 100 meters in a radius suddenly trembled, and then, countless ice blue long swords. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. Appeared in the air, behind him, in front of him, above him, below him, the entire space was almost surrounded by this ice blue long sword. These icy blue blades floated silently like this, and they shook their bodies slightly, but they exuded a chilling killing intent and sword intent, capable of destroying everything. Mihawk was startled, looking at the space in front of him, behind him, surrounded by ice blue blades, and suddenly smiled bitterly. He understood that in this field, here, is the other side's world, and the other side can control everything and control everything. Everything, in the opponent's hands, can be transformed into a terrifying sword intent. His power is infinite. Standing up slowly, Mihawk was neither disappointed nor depressed, but spoke with a smile. I lost. You took a step ahead of me and realized such a profound realm. But, this stop is not over yet, I will catch up with you. Sooner or later, I have to fight you. Chapter 320. Do you want to be the Pirate King? The sword intent slowly dissipated, the sword body dissipated, and a stream of light entered from Yang Qing's eyebrows. His deity opened his eyes and looked at Mihawk. Yes. Without hesitation, Yang Qing agreed. The higher you go, the more lonely and desolate you will feel. The loneliness of high altitude, the loneliness of no opponent. One of the reasons for reaching out into this new world is to find an opponent. Only in constant battle can we make continuous progress. Kaido's battle is very dangerous, but Yang Qing's progress is also extremely obvious. The complete control of GN23 and the advancement of the two fruits have made Yang Qing's strength advance to a terrifying realm. Now, he doesn't even know how strong he is. The distorted space gradually began to return to its original state, and the crowd watching the battle did not approach the two until then. Seeing the chaotic scene in the field, they all gasped. As if being cut by thousands of long swords. On the ground, the swords are crisscrossed, a devastated area, the dense jungle, the flowers and plants have disappeared. Here, only a piece of yellow soil remains. Mihawk gasped, and when he saw everyone coming, he didn't speak, but quickly recovered his bottomed physical strength. He is very tired, and this tired state has a great impact on his combat effectiveness. Shanks' eyes narrowed, and after glancing at Mihawk, he looked at Yang Qing. Shanks knows the strength of Mahawk. But even so, it is still not Yang Qing's opponent. So, how strong is this young boy in front of him? Whitebeard, can he fight again? This is a very terrifying guess. If Yang Qing can fight against Whitebeard, then, given his age and youth, it will have a profound impact on the entire world. He will likely become the next One Piece, lead the next era, and become the top figure in the next era. Half an hour later, under the shade of a tree, Yang Qing, Shanks, and Mahawk sat together. Far away from the others, it seems that there is something hidden to say. So, Shanks, what are the two of us here to do? Mahawk frowned. Yang Qing also raised her eyebrows and looked at Shanks. What do you think of his strength? Shanks said solemnly, and he was self-evident in his words, referring to Yang Qing. Mahawk's eyes flashed and he pondered for a moment. It's very strong. For now, it's much stronger than me. That's just his swordsmanship. Lucifer also controls the power of 2 devil fruits and 3 color domineering. This guy can be said to be unfathomable now. Shanks said seriously. Yang Qing touched his nose and didn't say anything. Facing the praise of these two people, it seemed that nothing was appropriate. Mahawk raised his eyebrows, but did not resist. He admires Yang Qing very much in kendo, but thinking that this is only one aspect of this guy's strength, he can't help but admire Yang Qing in his heart. Most people understand the power of specialization. If you want to truly achieve something in one area, you still need to specialize and cultivate in a certain field. Only then can there be a glimmer of hope to enter the supreme realm. But this guy in front of him is not only kendo, but his devil fruit is extremely terrifying in terms of domineering. He's really scary, Mahawk admitted with a nod. Especially him, still very young. Shanks said solemnly, this is the real horror. Whitebeard is the strongest man in the world, but he is old. At this age, Yang Qing has reached the same level as them, or even surpassed them, which is really scary. It proves its strong potential, and it can achieve the goal that they dreamed in their hearts, but they have never been able to achieve it. Mahawk was startled, looking at Yang Qing's face nearly 20 years younger than him, and sighed. The next generation is terrifying. Yes, the afterlife is terrifying. Even Mahawk, who is not very old, has to admire Yang Qing like this. Then, Lucifer, let me ask you a question. Shanks looked at Yang Qing dignifiedly. You don't have to rush to answer, think carefully, and you can even tell me the answer later. What? Yang Qing wondered. Do you want to be One Piece? Shanks said. But when these words came out, Yang Qing was stunned, Mahawk's eyes widened, his mouth wide open, and he couldn't close for a long time. One Piece. Yang Qing was a little confused by Shanks' sudden words. To be honest, when he first came to this world, he didn't have any unique ideas, he just ate and waited to die. When I heard that Roger was executed, the spark of dream in my heart just ignited. He had an idea of becoming a pirate, a big pirate. It could be said that this was his dream. As the voyage went on, Yang Qing found himself getting stronger and stronger. Then his dream evolved, and he had desires, crazy desires and desires, which shocked the world and drowned all the terrible desires and desires of human beings. If he wants to become the strongest in the world, and to become the strongest in the world, the ultimate person he needs to face is Whitebeard. This is also the reason why Yang Qing can unceremoniously declare war on Whitebeard when he arrives at Fishman Island. He is not afraid, because sooner or later there will be a battle. Finally, at this moment, Yang Qing stood at the last stop, only one step away from Whitebeard. He is going to fulfill his dream with his own hands, but to be honest, he is not sure in his heart whether he is the opponent of the #1 person in the world. Just Kaido is already so difficult, not to mention Whitebeard, who has rarely failed in his entire life. In this day and age, Whitebeard. This chapter is not over. Click on the next page to continue reading. It is a symbol of invincibility, like the totem of an ancient clan. And One Piece. Yang Qing thought about it. After thinking about it carefully, he really found that he had never had this idea. What he thinks more about is how to change the world after becoming number one in the world. At that time, he may choose to retire, or he may continue to walk with his partners to find a stronger opponent. However, at this moment, One Piece, these three words are like magic, burning the blood in Yang Qing's veins. I'm the man who wants to be the pirate king. For some reason, the smiley face with wide mouth and wide teeth flashed into his thoughts. The man who wanted to become the pirate king, the protagonist in his destiny, the words that were always on his lips began to reverberate in Yang Qing's mind. One Piece.